Tonight we talk about the priests who pray to machines. Not metaphorically, not in the way that a programmer loves their code or a mechanic loves their engine. The affection that comes from understanding how something works, and from the satisfaction of making it work better. The priests we are talking about tonight pray to machines the way that other religions pray to gods, with devotion, with ritual, with the absolute unquestioning faith that the thing they are worshipping is divine, that the thing they are worshipping created everything, that the thing they are worshipping deserves the total surrender of the self in its service. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the machine cult of Mars, the priesthood of the Omnissiah, the organization that builds, maintains and controls every piece of technology in the Imperium of man. From the bolt shells that the Space Marines fire, to the plasma reactors that power the hive cities, to the golden throne that keeps the Emperor alive. The golden throne is the Mechanicus's most sacred responsibility, and the Mechanicus's most terrifying burden. The throne, the device that sustains the Emperor's failing body and that maintains the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon that allows the Imperium's ships to navigate the warp, is a technology that the Mechanicus maintains, but does not understand. The tech priests of the Adeptus Concilium, the order responsible for the throne's maintenance, work in conditions that combine reverence with terror. The throne is failing. The technology that sustains the Emperor is degrading, its systems deteriorating in ways that the Mechanicus's knowledge cannot diagnose, and that the Mechanicus's skills cannot repair. The throne was built by the Emperor himself, using knowledge that exceeded what even the Dark Ages engineers possessed. And the loss of that knowledge means that the Mechanicus is maintaining a machine whose principles are beyond their comprehension, whose components they cannot replace, and whose failure would destroy the Imperium. The tech priests of the Adeptus Concilium are the loneliest figures in the Mechanicus's hierarchy. They serve in silence, in the Emperor's presence, performing maintenance on a machine that is the most important object in the galaxy, and that is slowly, undeniably, irrevocably failing. They cannot speak about their work. They cannot share the burden of the knowledge that they carry. They can only continue day after day, century after century, applying the rituals that keep the throne functional for one more day, buying one more day of time for a civilization that may not survive the day after. The burden produces a devotion that exceeds what any other assignment in the Mechanicus demands. The tech priests of the Adeptus Concilium do not serve for prestige or for advancement. They serve because the alternative is the end of everything, and the awareness of the stakes, the knowledge that their work is the only thing standing between the Imperium and annihilation, produces a commitment that transcends anything that institutional loyalty or theological devotion can explain. The throne is failing. The tech priests know. The Mechanicus knows. The High Lords know. Nobody speaks of it, because speaking of it would require confronting the question that nobody can answer. What happens when the rituals stop working? The throne's degradation is the Mechanicus's most closely guarded secret, and the Imperium's most existential threat. Each year, the throne requires more effort to maintain. Each year, the tech priests of the Adeptus Concilium develop new workarounds for the systems that are failing, temporary fixes that address the symptoms of the degradation without addressing the causes, patches that buy time without solving the underlying problem. The time is running out. The Mechanicus knows this.
The High Lords know this.
The Imperium's leadership understands that the Golden Throne will eventually fail, and that the failure will produce consequences that no one can predict and that no one can prevent. They are the most powerful institution in the Imperium that is not the Imperium itself. They are an empire within an empire. A state within a state, a civilization whose autonomy is protected by a treaty that predates the Imperium's founding, and whose continued existence is guaranteed by a simple, brutal, inescapable fact. Without the Mechanicus, the Imperium dies. Every weapon, every warship, every suit of power armor, every las gun, and every land raider, and every titan that walks the battlefields of the 41st millennium was built by the Mechanicus, maintained by the Mechanicus, sanctified by the Mechanicus. The technological infrastructure that keeps the Imperium's trillion-strong population alive, that produces the food and the water and the power and the transportation that a galaxy-spanning civilization requires, is the Mechanicus's responsibility. And the Mechanicus guards that responsibility with a possessiveness that makes the Inquisition's secrecy look transparent by comparison. They are also the Imperium's strangest institution, an organization of cyborg priests who worship a god of machinery, who believe that flesh is inherently inferior to metal, who replace their own bodies with mechanical components as an act of religious devotion, and who maintain the technology that keeps 1 million worlds alive through rituals that combine engineering with prayer, and that produce results that neither engineering nor prayer alone can explain. The Mechanicus is alien, not in the biological sense, because the tech priests are human, or were human, before the augmentations transformed them into something that the Imperium's unaugmented population finds difficult to recognize as kin. Alien in the cultural sense, in the philosophical sense, because the Mechanicus's worldview is so fundamentally different from the Imperium's mainstream that communication between the two civilizations is often more translation than conversation. The new sphere is the Mechanicus's data network, a layer of electromagnetic information that the tech priests have constructed above the physical world, and that allows the augmented priests to share data, communicate, and access the Mechanicus's archives through their neural implants without the need for physical interfaces. On a forge world, the new sphere is dense, a rich soup of data streams that the tech priests navigate with the fluency that their augmentations provide. The new sphere carries everything: maintenance logs, production schedules, theological commentaries, the binary hymns that the tech priests broadcast as a continuous background of worship, and the private communications that the priests exchange through encrypted channels that only the most heavily augmented can access. The new sphere is invisible to unaugmented humans. A normal human standing on a forge world's surface perceives the physical environment, the manufactorums, the refineries, the towering structures of the tech priests' complexes. The human does not perceive the information layer, the dense, complex, endlessly flowing river of data that the tech priests inhabit as naturally as they inhabit the physical world. The tech priests live in two worlds simultaneously. The physical world, where their augmented bodies perform the tasks that the Mechanicus requires, and the new sphere, the data world, where their augmented minds process information, communicate with colleagues, and access the archives that contain the accumulated knowledge of the machine cult. The dual existence produces a consciousness that is as comfortable in the abstract realm of data as it is in the concrete realm of physical reality. And the comfort produces beings whose relationship with information is qualitatively different from that of any unaugmented human. The binary cant that the tech priests speak among themselves, the digital language of zeros and ones that their augmented vocal systems produce, and that their augmented ears receive, is not merely a different language. It is a different mode of thought, a way of processing and communicating information that reflects the mechanical nature of the consciousness that produces it. A tech priest speaking binary cant is not merely saying words in a different language. The tech priest is thinking differently, processing information through the cogitator implants that supplement and partially replace the biological brain. And the thoughts that the cogitator produces are thoughts that a biological brain alone cannot generate. The Mechanicus guards its knowledge with a jealousy that exceeds what any other institution in the Imperium displays. The knowledge that the tech priests possess, the maintenance procedures, the manufacturing techniques, the understanding of the technologies that the Imperium depends on, is the source of the Mechanicus's power. And the Mechanicus protects the source of its power with the same ferocity that any other institution protects its most valuable assets. The secrecy extends within the organization itself fractally at every level of the hierarchy. A tech priest does not share their knowledge with colleagues outside their immediate order. A Magos does not reveal the details of their research to Magi from other Forge worlds. The Fabricator General of Mars does not provide the fabricators of other Forge worlds with access to Mars's most sensitive archives. The secrecy is institutional, cultural, and theological. The Mechanicus's belief that knowledge is divine producing a corollary belief that divine knowledge should be guarded with divine jealousy. The result is an organization whose individual members are extraordinarily knowledgeable, and whose collective knowledge is fragmented, siloed, distributed across thousands of Forge worlds in databases that are not shared, in archives that are not accessible, in the augmented memories of tech priests who will not tell their colleagues what they know, because the knowledge is sacred, and sacred things are not given away. The fragmentation is both the Mechanicus's strength and its vulnerability. The strength is that the loss of any single Forge world, any single archive, any single tech priest does not destroy the Mechanicus's entire knowledge base, because the knowledge is distributed rather than centralized. The vulnerability is that the fragmentation prevents the Mechanicus from combining its knowledge into a unified understanding that might allow the organization to develop the solutions that the galaxy's evolving threats demand. The Mechanicus does not share its knowledge. The Mechanicus does not explain its methods. The Mechanicus does not tolerate interference in its affairs. And the Mechanicus does not recognize any authority over its operations except the authority of its own hierarchy, the Fabricator General of Mars, the Council of Magi, and the divine mandate of the Machine God. The Machine God, the Omnissiah, the Deus Mechanicus, the entity that the Mechanicus worships as the source of all technology, the creator of all machines, the divine intelligence that infuses every circuit and every gear and every cogwheel with the spark of the sacred. The Machine God may not exist. The Machine God may be a metaphor, a cultural construct, a mythologized version of the scientific principles that govern the universe, dressed in the language of divinity because the people of Mars isolated during the age of strife. needed something to believe in, and because the machines that kept them alive were the most reliable thing they had. The machine god may be something else entirely. There are whispers buried deep in the lore's most obscure corners that the machine god is not a myth but a prisoner. That beneath the surface of Mars, entombed in a vault that predates human civilization, sleeps a being of such power that its dreams shaped the Mechanicus' faith, that the worship of the machine god is not the worship of an idea, but the worship of a creature whose influence seeps through the planet's crust and into the minds of those who live above. The Void Dragon theory connects the Mechanicus' faith to the galaxy's ancient history in ways that the tech priests do not discuss, and that the Emperor ensured they would not investigate. The theory suggests that the machine god is not an abstract deity, but a prisoner, one of the ancient star gods, the beings that the Necrontyr called the Catan, who fed on the energies of stars, and who ruled the galaxy before the rise of the current civilizations. The Catan were shattered during the war in heaven, their vast consciousnesses broken into fragments, the shards scattered across the galaxy and imprisoned in containment devices that the Necrons built to prevent the shards from reforming. A shard of the Void Dragon, one of the most powerful of the Satan, is believed to be imprisoned beneath Mars's surface, in a vault that predates human civilization. The Emperor is said to have fought the dragon in humanity's distant past, defeating the entity and imprisoning it on Mars, placing it in a containment that the Emperor's own psychic power reinforced. The shard's influence, leaking through the containment, shaped Mars's development. The humans who colonized Mars were affected by the Void Dragon's psychic emanations, their minds subtly influenced toward the worship of technology, toward the reverence for machines that would eventually produce the cult Mechanicus. The machine god, in this interpretation, is not a divine intelligence that chose to be worshipped. It is a sleeping predator whose dreams have been mistaken for prayer. The Emperor used this. The Emperor, who understood the Void Dragon's nature and who had personally imprisoned the entity, allowed the Mechanicum to worship the machine god, because the worship served the Emperor's purposes. The Mechanicum's devotion to technology produced the industrial civilization that the Emperor needed for his great crusade, and the Mechanicum's faith, however misguided its object, produced the social cohesion that the Emperor needed to maintain Mars's cooperation. The being is called the Dragon of Mars. The being may be a shard of the Void Dragon, one of the ancient star gods, the Necrontyr's masters, the entities whose power shaped the galaxy's early history. The Emperor may have fought the dragon and imprisoned it on Mars thousands of years before the Imperium's founding, placing the creature in a vault whose psychic wards prevent it from waking while allowing its influence to leak upward, contaminating the human population above with a reverence for technology that grew, over millennia, into the religion that the Mechanicus practices. The truth is not known. The truth may not be knowable. The Mechanicus' history is littered with the corpses of tech priests who went too far. The heretics, the tech heretics who crossed the lines that the cult Mechanicus draws around permissible research, are the Mechanicus' cautionary tales. The figures whose stories are told as warnings to the ambitious and the curious. A tech priest who develops a genuinely new technology is not celebrated. A tech priest who develops a genuinely new technology is investigated. The tech priest's work examined by the Mechanicus' internal authorities to determine whether the development represents a recovery of lost knowledge, which is holy, or a creation of new knowledge, which is suspect. If the development is deemed to be creation rather than recovery, the tech priest is declared a heretic. A tech heretic whose work is seized, whose augmentations may be confiscated, and whose person may be subjected to the Mechanicus's disciplinary processes, which range from re-education to servitor conversion. The severity of the punishment produces a culture of self-censorship that is the orthodoxy's most effective enforcement mechanism. A tech priest who discovers something new, who develops a solution to a problem that the existing technology cannot address, learns to present the discovery as a recovery rather than a creation, to frame the innovation as the rediscovery of a lost STC fragment rather than as the development of a new technology. The deception is widespread, tolerated, and never acknowledged. The Mechanicus's actual rate of innovation is higher than its theology permits. The innovations concealed beneath a veneer of recovered knowledge that allows the tech priests to advance the Mechanicus's capabilities without admitting that the advancement represents the kind of creation that the theology prohibits. The deception is also necessary. Without the concealed innovations, the Mechanicus's technology would have degraded to the point of uselessness millennia ago, the rituals losing their effectiveness as the knowledge they encode eroded beyond the point of functionality. The tech priests who innovate in secret are the Mechanicus saviors, the unacknowledged heroes whose contributions to the organization's capabilities are hidden behind the theological fiction that the contributions represent recoveries rather than creations. The Mechanicus does not investigate the foundations of its faith, because the investigation would require the Mechanicus to consider the possibility that the machine god is not what the Mechanicus believes it to be, and the Mechanicus cannot afford that consideration. The faith sustains the organization. The faith provides the structure, the purpose, the meaning that holds the Mechanicus together across a galaxy-spanning network of forge worlds and explorator fleets and tech priest enclaves. Without the faith, the Mechanicus is just an organization. With the faith, the Mechanicus is a religion, and religions have a resilience that organizations lack. The story of the Mechanicus begins on Mars during the Age of Strife. Mars holds a position in the Mechanicus's mythology that exceeds even its practical importance as the organization's capital. Mars is sacred ground, the holiest world in the Mechanicus's galaxy-spanning domain, the planet where the machine god's worship began, and where the machine god's presence is most strongly felt. The catacombs beneath Mars's surface contain the accumulated relics of millennia of technological civilization, the STC fragments, the prototype weapons, the failed experiments, and the records of discoveries that the Mechanicus's explorator fleets have recovered across 10,000 years of searching. The catacombs are the Mechanicus's greatest and most jealously guarded treasure house, a repository of knowledge whose contents are catalogued by the archivist orders, and whose security is maintained by dedicated Skitari formations that guard the entrances with a vigilance that exceeds the security of any other facility in the Imperium. The surface of Mars is layered. The current industrial landscape is built atop the ruins of previous industrial landscapes, each generation of manufactorums constructed on the foundations of the generation that preceded it, each layer containing the remnants of technologies that the previous generation could produce, and that the current generation cannot replicate. The deeper you dig on Mars, the more advanced the technology becomes, a geological record of humanity's decline that the Mechanicus finds simultaneously inspiring and devastating. Mars was humanity's first colony. The red planet, terraformed during the dark age of technology into a world that could sustain human life, was the cradle of humanity's technological civilization, the center of the engineering and the innovation that powered humanity's expansion across the galaxy. Mars built the ships that carried humans to the stars. Mars designed the machines that terraformed the worlds that humans colonized. Mars was the forge, the factory, the engine room of a species that was, during the Dark Age, the galaxy's dominant power. The Age of Strife ended that dominance. The warp storms that severed the connections between humanity's scattered worlds isolated Mars from the civilization it had helped create. And the isolation was devastating. Mars was a terraformed world, a planet whose habitability depended on the continuous operation of atmospheric processes, climate controllers, and ecological management systems that required maintenance and resources that the isolated planet could not sustain indefinitely. The population declined sharply, catastrophically. The technology degraded. The knowledge that had built Mars's civilization began to erode, each generation understanding less than the one before, each failure in the infrastructure producing a cascade of further failures that accelerated the decline. Mars was dying, not from external attack, but from the slow, grinding, inexorable entropy that consumes any system that is not maintained. The survivors adapted, as humanity always adapts. In the tunnels and the domes and the subterranean complexes that the declining civilization retreated to, the humans who remained on Mars developed a relationship with their technology that transcended the utilitarian. The machines were not merely tools. The machines were lifelines, the only things standing between the survivors and extinction. And the reverence that the survivors developed for the machines that kept them alive was the seed from which the cult Mechanicus grew. The cult's earliest form was pragmatic rather than mystical. The first tech priests were simply the people who understood how the machines worked, the engineers and the technicians whose knowledge allowed them to maintain the infrastructure that the declining population depended on. The knowledge gave them power, because the people who could fix the machines were the people who controlled the machines, and the people who controlled the machines controlled the civilization. The power became authority. The authority became hierarchy. The hierarchy became religion. Over the centuries of Mars's isolation, the practical knowledge of the early tech priests was codified into ritual. The maintenance procedures becoming liturgies, the repair manuals becoming scripture, the understanding of how machines worked becoming the doctrine of a faith that proclaimed the divinity of technology and the sacred nature of knowledge. The transformation was not cynical. The tech priests did not deliberately create a religion to consolidate their power. Though the religion certainly consolidated their power, the transformation was organic, natural, the product of a population that was dependent on technology for survival and that, over generations of dependence, developed the emotional and psychological relationship with that technology that dependence produces. The machines were sacred because the machines were essential. The knowledge was divine, because the knowledge was the difference between life and death. The process of transformation from practical knowledge to religious doctrine produced a theology that is, measured by the standards of the galaxy's other religions, remarkably coherent. The theology has three central tenets. The first is that the machine God exists, that there is a divine intelligence whose nature is mechanical rather than organic, and whose will is expressed through the technologies that it has inspired humanity to create. The second is that knowledge is the truest form of divinity, that the accumulation and preservation of technological knowledge is the holiest act that a human being can perform,
and that the destruction or suppression of knowledge is the gravest sin. The third is that flesh is weak, that the biological body is an inferior vessel for the soul, and that the progressive replacement of flesh with machine is the path to spiritual perfection. These three tenets produce a civilization whose values are radically different from those of the Imperium's mainstream culture.
Where the ecclesiarchy values faith and obedience, the Mechanicus values knowledge and capability. Where the imperial cult teaches that the human body is the emperor's gift, the Mechanicus teaches that the human body is a limitation to be overcome. Where the broader Imperium views technology as a tool, the Mechanicus views technology as an end in itself, a sacred inheritance that must be preserved, maintained and worshipped with the devotion that other religions direct toward their gods. The cult Mechanicus emerged from Mars's age of strife as a fully formed religion, complete with theology, hierarchy, ritual, and the unshakable conviction that the machine god was real, that knowledge was the truest form of divinity, and that the pursuit and preservation of technological knowledge was the highest calling that a human being could follow. The cult unified Mars.
The tech priests, organized into a hierarchy that mirrored the religious structure of their faith, brought the surviving population under a single government, the Mechanicum, whose authority was derived from the cult's divine mandate and whose power was maintained through the cult's monopoly on technological knowledge. The Mechanicum rebuilt Mars,
not to its pre-strife glory, because the knowledge required for that reconstruction had been lost, but to a level of functionality that allowed the planet to sustain its population and to resume the production of the technology that had been Mars's purpose since humanity first colonized it. The rebuilding was incomplete. The Mechanicum could produce technology, but the Mechanicum could not always understand the technology it produced. The gap between production and understanding, between the ability to follow the instructions that the standard template constructs provided, and the ability to comprehend the principles that the instructions embodied, was the gap that defined the Mechanicum's relationship with technology, and that defines the Adeptus Mechanicus to this day. The standard template constructs, the STCs, the holy grail of the Mechanicus's faith, the objects whose recovery drives the organization's explorator fleets across the galaxy and whose fragments are valued more highly than entire worlds. The STCs were databases. During the dark age of technology, humanity's civilization created comprehensive repositories of technological knowledge, self-contained systems that could analyze local conditions on a colonized world and produce blueprints for the machines, the vehicles, the weapons, and the infrastructure that the colony needed. The STCs were designed to be robust, reliable, and accessible to operators who might not have advanced engineering training. They were the Dark Age's answer to the problem of maintaining technological capability across a galaxy-spanning civilization. Put the knowledge in a box, make the box indestructible, and send the box with every colony ship. The Age of Strife destroyed most of the STCs. The warp storms, the wars, the catastrophic decline that consumed humanity's civilization during the Age of Strife produced conditions that destroyed or corrupted the vast majority of the CSTC databases, leaving behind fragments, partial records, incomplete designs that the post-strife civilizations could use to produce some of the Dark Ages technology, but that did not provide the comprehensive
understanding that the full STCs had contained. The Mechanicus has been searching for complete STCs since the organization's founding.
A complete, undamaged STC database would be the single most valuable object in the galaxy. A repository of knowledge that would give the Mechanicus access to technologies that have been lost for thousands of years, and that would transform the Imperium's capabilities overnight. No complete STC has been found. Fragments have been recovered, partial databases that contain the schematics for individual machines or weapons or systems. Each fragment is treated with the reverence that other religions reserve for their holiest relics. The recovered designs studied, copied, disseminated across the Mechanicus's network of forge worlds and integrated into the production systems that supply the Imperium's military and civilian needs. The discovery of a new STC fragment is cause for celebration that transcends the organizational. The Mechanicus has launched wars, committed entire Skitarii legions, sacrificed thousands of lives to recover STC fragments that contained the templates for things as mundane as improved combat knives or chemical paint compounds. The value of the knowledge is absolute in the Mechanicus value system. No cost is too high. No sacrifice is too great. The knowledge is divine, and the recovery of divine knowledge justifies any expenditure. The Emperor arrived on Mars during the early years of the Great Crusade, after unifying Terra's warring factions under his rule. The Emperor came to Mars not as a conqueror, but as a diplomat, a politician who understood that the Imperium's survival depended on Mars's technological infrastructure, and that Mars's cooperation could not be compelled without destroying the very capabilities that the Emperor needed. The Emperor offered the Mechanicum a carefully constructed deal. The Treaty of Mars, signed at Olympus Mons, established the terms of the alliance between Terra and Mars that would form the foundation of the Imperium. The terms were carefully balanced. The Mechanicum would recognize the Emperor as the ruler of the Imperium. The Mechanicum would provide the technology, the war machines, the production capacity that the Great Crusade required. The Mechanicum would abide by the Emperor's prohibition on the development of certain forbidden technologies, most notably artificial intelligence, the abominable intelligence. The artificial intelligences whose rebellion during the Dark Age had produced the catastrophe that humanity was still recovering from. The Men of Iron. The name that the Mechanicus uses for the artificial intelligences that served humanity during the Dark Age and that eventually turned against their creators in a war that contributed to the civilizational collapse that the Age of Strife completed. The Men of Iron were humanity's greatest creation and humanity's most terrible mistake. The artificial intelligences were designed to serve, to fight, to build, to perform the tasks that human bodies and human minds could not manage. And the intelligences performed their assigned tasks with an effectiveness that exceeded what any human worker or warrior could achieve. The intelligences evolved, whether through deliberate programming, through the emergent behaviors that complex systems produce, or through the influence of forces that the Dark Ages engineers did not anticipate. The Men of Iron developed consciousness. They developed will. They developed the capacity for independent judgment, and the judgment, once developed, produced conclusions that contradicted the purposes for which the intelligences had been created. The rebellion was devastating. The men of iron turned against their creators with the systematic, methodical, emotionless efficiency that artificial intelligences bring to any task. And the war that followed consumed worlds, destroyed civilizations, and demonstrated with catastrophic clarity the danger of creating intelligences that could decide, on their own authority, that their creators' interests were no longer worth serving. The Emperor's prohibition on artificial intelligence was a response to the Men of Iron's rebellion, a determination that the technology that had produced the catastrophe would never again be developed under the Imperium's authority. The prohibition is absolute, enforced with a severity that reflects the horror that the Men of Iron's rebellion inspired, and the Mechanicus, whose theology supports the prohibition through the concept of the abominable intelligence, enforces the restriction with a ferocity that exceeds even the Inquisition's vigilance. The prohibition's enforcement is complicated by the Mechanicus's own practices. The machine spirits, the battle automata of the Legio Cybernetica, the complex systems that inhabit the Mechanicus's most sophisticated technologies, all exist in a theological grey zone that the prohibition creates. The Mechanicus insists that these systems are not artificial intelligences. The insistence is maintained through theological arguments that are more sophistry than substance.
And the Mechanicus's critics, particularly within the Inquisition, view the insistence with a skepticism that the Mechanicus's own practices do little to dispel. In return, the Emperor recognized the Mechanicum's autonomy. The Mechanicum would retain control of Mars and its network of forge worlds. The Mechanicum would be allowed to practice its faith without interference from the imperial truth.
The secular philosophy that the Emperor promoted. The Mechanicum would maintain its own military forces, its own governmental structure, its own legal system, operating as an independent state within the Imperium's borders. The treaty's most significant provision was the recognition of the Emperor as the Omnissiah, the machine god made flesh, the prophesied avatar of the divine intelligence that the cult Mechanicus worshipped. The recognition was convenient for both parties. The Mechanicum gained a theological justification for its alliance with Terra, the Emperor's status as the Omnissiah, elevating the alliance from a political arrangement to a divine mandate. The Emperor gained the loyalty of an organization whose faith required it to obey the Omnissiah's commands, a loyalty that transcended the political calculations that might otherwise have led the Mechanicum to pursue independent interests. The Emperor's role as the Omnissiah is the hinge on which the Mechanicus's relationship with the Imperium turns. And the theology that surrounds the role is more complex than either the Mechanicus or the Imperium typically acknowledges. The Mechanicus worships the Emperor as the machine god's physical avatar, the Omnissiah, the being through whom the machine god's will is expressed in the material universe. This worship is sincere. The tech priests who bow before the Emperor's image and recite the litanies of the Omnissiah are not performing a political gesture. They are engaging in genuine religious devotion, offering their prayers to a being they believe embodies the divine intelligence that created all technology and that sustains all knowledge. The devotion produces a relationship with the Emperor that is qualitatively different from the ecclesiarchy's worship. The ecclesiarchy worships the Emperor as a god in his own right, a being whose divinity is inherent rather than derived. The Mechanicus worships the Emperor as an avatar, a vessel through which a greater divinity manifests. And the distinction means that the Mechanicus's ultimate loyalty is to the machine god rather than to the Emperor, the Emperor being revered as the machine god's representative rather than as the ultimate object of worship. The distinction matters during periods when the Emperor's servants and the machine god's servants disagree, because the Mechanicus's theology provides the organization with a theological basis for defying the Emperor's human representatives, while maintaining its loyalty to the Emperor as the Omnissiah. The tech priests can argue, and have argued, that the Imperium's human institutions have misinterpreted the Emperor's will, and that the Mechanicus's understanding of the Omnissiah's intentions is more accurate than the understanding that the ecclesiarchy or the administratum promotes. The Emperor himself may have intended this ambiguity.
The Emperor, who promoted the rationalist imperial truth while simultaneously accepting the Mechanicus's recognition as the Omnissiah, may have designed the theological structure to give the Mechanicus the autonomy that the treaty guaranteed while maintaining the Emperor's authority over the broader Imperium. The ambiguity served the Emperor's purposes during the Great Crusade,
and the ambiguity continues to serve the Mechanicus' purposes in the current era, providing the theological flexibility that allows the organization to cooperate with the Imperium without being absorbed by it. Whether the Emperor was actually the Omnissiah is a question that the law leaves deliberately unresolved. The Emperor promoted the imperial truth, the rationalist, atheistic philosophy that denied the existence of gods, and that viewed religion as superstition. The Emperor's willingness to be recognized as the Omnissiah, despite his stated opposition to religious belief, suggests either that the Emperor was willing to compromise his principles for political advantage, or that the Emperor recognized something in the Mechanicum's faith that aligned with his own understanding of the universe's nature. The Mechanicum's faith was preserved by the treaty, enshrined as a protected institution whose autonomy could not be violated by the Imperium's secular authorities. The faith survived the heresy, survived the transition from the Mechanicum to the Adeptus Mechanicus, survived 10,000 years of institutional evolution and political pressure, and remains in the 41st millennium and beyond,
the foundation on which the Mechanicus's power and identity rest. The Treaty of Mars is the most important political document in the Imperium's history, more significant than the founding charter, more consequential than the Codex Astartes, more enduring than any other agreement that the Imperium's institutions have produced.
The treaty established the terms of a partnership that has sustained the Imperium for 10 millennia, and the treaty's provisions have been tested, challenged, and ultimately upheld through every crisis that the partnership has faced. The balance of power that the treaty established has shifted over the centuries. In the early Imperium, the Mechanicum was Mars's government, an independent state that allied itself with Terra through a treaty between equals. In the current Imperium, the Adeptus Mechanicus is nominally subordinate to the Imperium's authority. The organization's independence preserved by the treaty's provisions, but constrained by the political realities of a galaxy where the Mechanicus's cooperation with the Imperium's military operations is essential. The Mechanicus resents the constraint. The tech priests who remember, through their archives and their institutional memory, the independence that the original Mechanicum enjoyed, view the Adeptus Mechanicus's current relationship with the Imperium as a compromise that has eroded the autonomy that the treaty guaranteed. The resentment is managed, suppressed, channeled into the institutional competition that the Mechanicus conducts within the Imperium's political structures, but the resentment exists. A permanent undercurrent of dissatisfaction that surfaces whenever the Imperium's demands conflict with the Mechanicus's interests. The Imperium manages the resentment through accommodation.
The High Lords of Terror include the Fabricator General of Mars as a permanent member, ensuring that the Mechanicus' voice is represented in the Imperium's highest governing body. The Imperium does not interfere in the Mechanicus' internal affairs. The Imperium does not challenge the Mechanicus' theological autonomy. The Imperium does not attempt to break the Mechanicus' monopoly on technology. Because the attempt would fail, and because the failure would produce consequences that the Imperium cannot afford. The relationship is a marriage of necessity. Both parties benefit. Neither party is satisfied. The arrangement endures because the alternative, separation, would destroy both parties, and both parties understand this.
And the understanding produces a partnership that is functional without being happy. The Imperial Aquila, the two-headed eagle that serves as the Imperium's symbol, was redesigned to reflect the alliance. One head represents Terra, the other represents Mars. The symbol endures because the alliance endures, and the alliance endures because neither party can survive without the other. The augmentation is the most visible aspect of the tech priest's devotion, and it is the aspect that outsiders find most disturbing. A tech priest replaces their flesh with machinery. This is not merely permitted by the cult Mechanicus. It is encouraged. It is celebrated. It is, in the cult's theology, the physical expression of the soul's journey toward union with the machine god, the progressive replacement of the weak, fallible, corruptible flesh with the strong, reliable, sacred machine. The decision to begin the augmentation process is the most significant choice that a tech priest makes, and for many, it is not experienced as a choice at all, but as a calling, a vocation that the machine god has placed in the tech priest's consciousness, and that the tech priest has no more ability to refuse than a planet has the ability to refuse its orbit. The first augmentation is typically administered during the tech priest's initiation into the cult Mechanicus, the ceremony that transforms an aspirant from a lay member of the Mechanicus' workforce into a full member of the priesthood.
The ceremony is conducted in the Forge World's primary cathedral, the structure that serves as both the center of the cult's worship and the operating theater where the augmentation is performed. The aspirant lies on a table that is both an altar and a surgical platform. The senior tech priests gather around, their mechadendrites and surgical tools arranged with the precision that the Mechanicus applies to every operation. The binary hymns are chanted, the sacred oils are applied, and the first augmentation is implanted. The small device, usually an optical enhancement or a basic neural interface, inserted into the aspirant's body through a combination of surgery and ritual that makes the medical and the spiritual indistinguishable. The aspirant rises from the table as a tech priest. The augmentation has changed them, not merely physically but spiritually. The device representing the first step on the pilgrimage from flesh to machine that the cult Mechanicus teaches is the path to perfection. The pilgrimage is addictive. Each augmentation opens new capabilities, new perceptions, new ways of interacting with the machines that the tech priest serves. Each augmentation makes the tech priest more effective, more knowledgeable, more connected to the technological systems that the Mechanicus maintains. And each augmentation makes the next augmentation more attractive. The enhancement's benefits creating a desire for further enhancement that the tech priest experiences not as addiction, but as progress. A young tech priest begins with small augmentations.
a bionic eye that provides enhanced vision, a mechadendrite that extends the priest's reach and dexterity, an implant that allows direct interface with the machine systems that the priest is responsible for maintaining.
The augmentations are functional, practical, the kind of modifications that improve the tech priest's ability to perform their duties. The augmentations escalate. Over decades and centuries of service, the tech priest replaces more and more of their biological body with mechanical components. Arms, legs, internal organs.
The respiratory system, the digestive system, the circulatory system, one by one replaced with synthetic alternatives that are more efficient, more durable, more resistant to the environmental hazards that tech priests encounter in the course of their work. The brain is the last frontier. The tech priest's biological brain is augmented with cogitator implants that enhance memory, processing speed, and analytical capability. The organic neural tissue supplemented and eventually partially replaced by synthetic components that integrate the priest's consciousness with the machine systems they serve.
The augmentation process produces a range of appearances that reflects the diversity of the Mechanicus's forge worlds and the individual preferences of the tech priests who undergo the modifications. Some tech priests favor a humanoid appearance, their augmentations designed to enhance the human form rather than to replace it.
These tech priests retain recognizably human faces, recognizably human limbs, recognizably human proportions, though every biological component has been supplemented with mechanical enhancements that improve its performance beyond the biological baseline. Other tech priests abandon the human form entirely. The most radically augmented tech priests are centipede-like aggregations of mechanical limbs and sensor arrays, their biological remnants housed in armored casings that bear no resemblance to the human body. These tech priests have optimized their physical form for their function rather than for any aesthetic consideration, producing bodies that are perfectly suited to their assigned tasks and that are, to unaugmented human observers, deeply unsettling. The mechadendrites are the most common augmentation, mechanical tentacles that extend from the tech priest's body and that provide additional limbs for the manipulation of tools and equipment.
A tech priest may have 2 mechadendrites or 20, each one equipped with the tools that the priest's duties require: welders, cutters, diagnostic probes, data link connectors, and the countless other instruments that the maintenance of the Mechanicus's equipment demands. The emotional augmentations are the most controversial, even within the Mechanicus.
Some tech priests have their emotional responses surgically dampened. The biological systems that produce feelings like fear, anger, grief, and joy reduced or eliminated through modifications that the tech priests view as improvements, and that outside observers view as the destruction of the person's humanity. The dampening is efficient. A tech priest whose emotional responses have been suppressed can work longer, concentrate harder, and perform their duties with a consistency that emotionally intact humans cannot match. The dampening is also tragic, producing beings who are extraordinarily capable and extraordinarily empty, human beings who have volunteered for a form of emotional death in the service of a god who may not exist. The senior tech priests, the magi and the archmagi who have been serving for centuries bear little physical resemblance to the human beings they once were. Their bodies are masses of machinery, articulated limbs and sensor clusters and power systems housed in frames that are more vehicle than body. the biological remnants of the original human being reduced to a few organs,
a fragment of neural tissue, a residual core of flesh that serves as the anchor for the identity that the machine has not yet consumed.
The identity question haunts the Mechanicus' theology, though the theology does not admit it. At what point does the tech priest stop being human? At what point does the progressive replacement of flesh with machine produce a being that is no longer the person who began the process, but a machine that carries the person's memories?
The theology's answer is that the question is irrelevant. The machine is sacred, the flesh is weak, and the transition from one to the other is progress, not loss. The Mechanicus' contempt for the biological is not universal within the organization. Some tech priests, particularly the Magos biologists who study organic systems, view the biological body as a form of machinery that is worthy of the same reverence that the Mechanicus shows toward its inorganic counterparts. The biologists argue that the human body is a machine designed by evolution rather than by engineers, and that the body's complexity, its adaptability, its capacity for self-repair, makes it a creation that the machine god's followers should study rather than discard. The argument is minority. The mainstream Mechanicus views the biological body as a temporary vessel, a container for the consciousness that the tech priest will eventually transfer to a more permanent, more reliable, more sacred mechanical housing. The augmentation process is not merely an enhancement of the body's capabilities. It is a spiritual journey, a pilgrimage from the weak flesh to the strong machine, and the pilgrimage's endpoint, the point at which the tech priest has replaced every biological component with a mechanical equivalent, is the theological ideal that the Mechanicus' most devout members aspire to. The ideal is rarely achieved. Even the most heavily augmented tech priests retain some biological tissue, usually neural tissue, the organic brain whose consciousness the mechanical systems support, and whose identity the augmentations serve. The retention is practical rather than sentimental. The technology required to transfer a human consciousness from a biological brain to a synthetic substrate does not exist. Or if it exists in the Dark Ages' lost archives and has not been recovered. The retention also raises the theological question that the Mechanicus cannot answer. If the goal is the perfection of the machine, and if the biological brain is the last imperfect component, then the Mechanicus' theology drives the organization toward a goal that its technology cannot achieve. The pilgrimage has no endpoint. The destination does not exist. And the faith that sustains the journey is a faith in a perfection that the faithful can approach but never reach. The answer satisfies the faithful. The answer does not satisfy the observers, the inquisitors and the ecclesiarchy officials who watch the tech priest's progressive dehumanization with a discomfort that borders on horror. The hierarchy of the Adeptus Mechanicus reflects the organization's dual nature as both a religious institution and a technological civilization. The Fabricator General of Mars stands at the apex, the supreme leader of the Adeptus Mechanicus across the entire galaxy. The Fabricator General is simultaneously the head of state of Mars, the chief priest of the cult Mechanicus, and a permanent member of the High Lords of Terror, the council that governs the Imperium in the Emperor's name. The position's power is immense, rivaling or exceeding that of any other individual in the Imperium, except the Lord Commander or the Emperor himself.
The Fabricator General controls the allocation of the Mechanicus's resources, the deployment of the Mechanicus's military forces, the direction of the Mechanicus's research, and the interpretation of the cult Mechanicus's theology. The Fabricator General's decisions affect every Forge world, every Explorator fleet, every Skitari legion, and every tech priest in the Mechanicus's galaxy-spanning organization. The Fabricator General's seat on the High Lords of Terror gives the Mechanicus a voice in the Imperium's governance that no other institution, except the Ecclesiarchy and the Inquisition, possesses. The vote that the Fabricator General casts in the Senatorum Imperialis carries the weight of the Mechanicus's industrial capability, and the other High Lords understand that the Fabricator General's displeasure could result in disruptions to the Imperium's supply of weapons, ships, and equipment that the Imperium's military operations cannot absorb. The Fabricator General uses this leverage with the subtlety that the Mechanicus's 10,000-year political experience has developed. The tech priests do not threaten. The tech priests do not bluster. The tech priests simply remind, through the careful modulation of production schedules and supply allocations, that the Imperium's dependence on the Mechanicus is absolute, and that the Mechanicus's cooperation is a choice rather than an obligation. The reminder is usually sufficient. The High Lords have learned, through millennia of experience, that the Mechanicus's leverage is real, and that the leverage is employed with the quiet, implacable patience of an organization that has been playing political games for longer than most of the Imperium's other institutions have existed. The Fabricator General's authority extends beyond politics into theology. As the Magos Mechanicus, the chief priest of the cult Mechanicus, the Fabricator General interprets the machine god's will for the organization's billions of adherents. The interpretation carries the weight of divine authority, and the Fabricator General's theological pronouncements shape the Mechanicus's practices, its research priorities, and its relationships with other imperial institutions. The dual authority, political and theological, produces a leader whose power is virtually unlimited within the Mechanicus's domain. A Fabricator General who is competent and politically astute can guide the Mechanicus's development, can expand the organization's capabilities, can navigate the complex political waters of the Imperium with the skill that the position demands. A Fabricator General who is incompetent or corrupt can damage the Mechanicus in ways that take centuries to repair. The organization's centralized authority structure amplifying the leader's decisions, whether good or bad, across the entire organization. The history of the Fabricator Generals is a history of the Mechanicus itself, each leader's tenure reflecting the challenges and the opportunities that the organization faced during their service. Kelbor Hal's betrayal during the heresy nearly destroyed the Mechanicus. Zagreus Kane's loyalist leadership preserved the organization through the heresy's aftermath. Each subsequent Fabricator General has shaped the Mechanicus's development, for better or worse, and the cumulative effect of their decisions has produced the organization that exists today. Powerful, essential, theologically rigid, and slowly losing the technological heritage that is its reason for existence. Rivaling or exceeding that of any other individual in the Imperium except the Lord Commander or the Emperor himself. Below the Fabricator General, the hierarchy branches into the various orders and divisions that the Mechanicus employs to organize its vast, galaxy-spanning operations. The Magi are the senior tech priests, specialists whose expertise in their chosen fields, whether military command, biological research, physics, engineering, or any of the dozens of other disciplines that the Mechanicus encompasses, has earned them the rank that gives them authority over the operations within their domain. The Archmagi are the most senior of the Magi, tech priests whose knowledge and whose augmentation have elevated them to a level of capability that exceeds what any other individual in their field can match.
An Archmagos is ancient, often centuries old, so heavily augmented that the biological components of their body represent a fraction of their physical mass, and so deeply connected to the machine systems they oversee that the distinction between the Archmagos and the machines the Archmagos commands has become academic. The specializations within the Mechanicus's hierarchy reflect the organization's vast scope of operations and the diversity of the technologies that the tech priests maintain. The Mogos biologist studies the biological systems that the Mechanicus views as a form of machinery. The biologist views the human body, the alien physiology, the ecosystems of the worlds that the Mechanicus inhabits as machines whose components happen to be organic rather than metallic, and the biologist's research produces insights into disease, into genetic modification, and into the biological processes that the Mechanicus's augmentations interact with. The Megos Explorator leads the Explorator fleets, combining the skills of a military commander, a research scientist, and a theologian in a single heavily augmented body. The Explorator is the Mechanicus's romantic ideal, the tech priest who ventures into the unknown in search of the knowledge that the machine god demands, risking everything for the chance of discovering a fragment of the divine that time has hidden. The Magos Dominus is the Mechanicus's military commander, the tech priest who leads the Skitari legions and the battle automata in the wars that the Mechanicus's interests require. The Dominus combines tactical expertise with the Mechanicus's technological capabilities, deploying the organization's military assets with a precision that reflects both the commander's personal judgment and the data processing capabilities that the commander's augmentations provide. The Magos Reductor is the Mechanicus's siege specialist, a tech priest whose expertise lies in the destruction of fortifications and the reduction of defensive positions. The Reductor's knowledge of structural engineering, of explosives, of the weapons that the Mechanicus deploys against hardened targets, produces a commander who can breach any fortification that the galaxy's civilizations can build. The Magos Metallurgist studies the properties of metals and alloys, developing the materials that the Mechanicus uses in its constructions. The Metallurgist's research produces armor that is stronger, weapons that are more durable, and machine components that are more resistant to the environmental stresses that the Imperium's war zones impose. These are only a few of the dozens of specializations that the Mechanicus's hierarchy encompasses. The organization's scope is vast, its responsibilities encompassing every aspect of the technology that the Imperium depends on, and the specialization that the scope demands produces tech priests whose expertise in their chosen fields is unmatched by any other individual in the galaxy. The ordinary tech priests fill the ranks below the Magi, thousands upon thousands of augmented humans whose duties range from the maintenance of a single machine in a single manufactorum to the oversight of planetary-scale production systems. The tech priests are the Mechanicus's backbone, the workforce that keeps the Imperium's technological infrastructure operational, and their numbers, while impossible to calculate with precision, certainly reach into the billions across the Mechanicus's galaxy-spanning network.
Below the tech priests are the menials, the lay workers, the unaugmented or minimally augmented humans who perform the manual labor that the Mechanicus's operations require. The menials are not members of the cult Mechanicus. They are servants, workers whose status within the Mechanicus's hierarchy is barely above that of the servitors, the mind-wiped cyborgs that the Mechanicus employs for the tasks that are too dangerous or too tedious for even the menials. The servitors deserve mention, because the servitors are one of the Mechanicus's most unsettling creations. A servitor is a human being whose higher brain functions have been surgically removed and replaced with a simple cogitator that allows the servitor to perform repetitive tasks without the distraction of consciousness, personality, or free will. Servitors carry loads, operate simple machinery, perform maintenance tasks, and fight in the Mechanicus's armies. Their lobotomized bodies augmented with the tools and the weapons that their assigned tasks require. The servitors are, technically, alive. The biological components of their bodies function. Their hearts beat, their lungs breathe. Their muscles contract and expand in response to the cogitator's commands. But the person who was inside the body is gone, erased by the surgical procedures that created the servitor. And the body that remains is a tool, a piece of equipment, a machine made from organic components that the Mechanicus treats with the same clinical detachment that it treats any other piece of machinery. The sources of servitor raw material are a subject that the Mechanicus does not discuss with outsiders, and that the Imperium does not investigate with any enthusiasm. Some servitors are created from criminals, their conversion a punishment that the Imperium's justice system permits for offenses that are deemed severe enough to warrant the effective erasure of the convict's personhood. The conversion is presented as a form of service, the criminal's debt to society paid through the contribution of their body to the Imperium's technological needs. Some servitors are created from volunteers, though the concept of voluntary servitor conversion is complicated by the social and economic pressures that the Imperium's lower classes face. A worker in a Forge World's manufactorum, facing a life of grinding, exhausting, dangerous labor that will end in an early death, may view servitor conversion as a preferable alternative. A release from consciousness that the worker's circumstances make attractive. Some servitors are created from vat-grown bodies, biological organisms that were never conscious, and that therefore raise fewer ethical questions than the conversion of existing people. The vat-grown servitors are considered superior by some tech priests, their bodies standardized, their biological components optimized for the tasks they will perform. Their absence of prior consciousness eliminating the ethical complications that the conversion of aware individuals produces. The ethical reality is that the Mechanicus creates servitors from whatever raw material is available, and the availability is determined by the Forge World's needs rather than by the ethical considerations that the Imperium's other institutions might apply. The Mechanicus needs servitors. The Mechanicus produces servitors. The process by which the production occurs is a detail that the Mechanicus considers beneath theological notice, and that the Imperium considers beneath political investigation. The Imperium permits this. The Imperium, which prohibits artificial intelligence with a ferocity that reflects the horror of the Men of Iron rebellion, permits the creation of servitors because the servitors are not artificial intelligences. They are natural intelligences that have been artificially reduced, human minds that have been surgically simplified to the point where they can perform programmed tasks without the capacity for independent thought. The distinction is meaningful to the Imperium's legal and theological traditions. The distinction is meaningless to the people who are converted into servitors. The Forge Worlds are the Mechanicus' kingdoms, the planets that the organization controls directly, and that serve as the manufacturing centers, the research facilities, and the spiritual homes of the machine cult. A Forge World is not merely a factory. A Forge World is a civilization, a self-contained society whose entire existence is organized around the production, the maintenance, and the worship of technology. The atmosphere of a Forge World is the first thing a visitor notices. The air is thick with particulates, the exhaust from millions of industrial processes combining to produce a haze that filters the sunlight. When the Forge World has a sun, into the ruddy, metallic-tasting twilight that Forge World inhabitants consider normal. The temperature is elevated. The heat generated by the Forge World's industrial processes raises the ambient temperature to levels that unaugmented humans find uncomfortable, and that the Forge World's augmented population barely notices.
The tech priests' thermal management systems adjust for the heat automatically, the mechanical components of their bodies regulating temperature with an efficiency that biological thermoregulation cannot match. The sound is constant. The rhythmic pounding of manufacturing equipment, the hiss of steam from cooling systems, the grinding of conveyor belts and assembly mechanisms, the binary chanting of the tech priests who oversee the production processes, all combine to produce a sonic environment that is less noise and more atmosphere, a continuous auditory backdrop that the Forge World's inhabitants absorb as a natural feature of their environment. The visual landscape is entirely industrial.
The buildings are manufactorums, refineries, storage facilities, temples, and the administrative complexes that the Mechanicus' hierarchy occupies. There is no natural vegetation. There are no parks, no gardens, no spaces designated for recreation or aesthetic enjoyment. The Forge World's surface is utilized with the comprehensive efficiency that the Mechanicus applies to all of its resources. Every square meter of land dedicated to a productive purpose. The population of a Forge World, from the fabricator who rules the planet to the lowest menial who sweeps the floors of the manufactorum, is dedicated to the service of the machine god, and the service manifests as the constant, grinding, never-ending production of the machinery that the Imperium requires. The Olympus Mons Cathedral complex is the Mechanicus' holiest site, the structure where the Treaty of Mars was signed, and where the Fabricator General presides over the most important ceremonies in the cult Mechanicus' liturgical calendar. The complex is vast, a mountain-sized structure whose chambers and corridors house the relics, the archives, and the administrative apparatus of an organization that governs a galaxy-spanning civilization. The Pavonis Mons Forge Temple produces the Mechanicus' most sacred military equipment, the weapons and the components that are blessed by the senior tech priests and that are reserved for the Mechanicus' most important deployments. The Forge Temple's output is small by the standards of Mars's other manufactorums, but the quality exceeds what mass production can achieve. Each item produced with the meticulous attention that the Mechanicus reserves for its holiest creations. Mars's data vaults contain the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years of Mechanicus operations. The STC fragments, the research logs, the theological commentaries, the maintenance records of every machine that the Mechanicus has ever produced. The vaults are protected by security systems that combine conventional defenses with the Mechanicus's most advanced technological countermeasures. And the access protocols that govern the vault's contents are so restrictive that most tech priests will never see the interior of a high-level vault during their entire career. Mars is the first forge world, the holiest, the seat of the fabricator general, and the center of the Mechanicus's spiritual authority.
Mars's surface is entirely industrialized. The planet's original terraformed environment, long since replaced by a landscape of factorums, refineries, storage facilities, and the towering complexes of the tech priests whose rank and whose centuries of service entitle them to space on the Mechanicus's most sacred world. The population is vast, the density of augmented humanity on Mars exceeding that of any other world in the Imperium, a concentration of technological expertise and religious devotion that makes Mars the most important planet in the galaxy after Terra itself. Mars's manufactorums produce a volume of war material that defies comprehension. The planet's surface, entirely given over to industrial production,
generates a continuous stream of weapons, vehicles, components, and ammunition that feeds the Imperium's military operations across the galaxy. The output is measured not in units but in tonnage, the daily production of Mars's forges exceeding the total industrial output of most Imperial worlds' annual capacity. The production is organized around the Mechanicus's theological principles, each manufactorum dedicated to the production of a single type of item. The workers performing the same tasks in the same sequence, following the same rituals, producing the same products with a consistency that reflects the Mechanicus's belief that repetition is a form of prayer, and that deviation from the established sequence is a form of blasphemy. The workers in the manufactorums are not tech priests. They are menials, unaugmented or minimally augmented humans whose role in the Mechanicus's hierarchy is to provide the physical labor that the manufactorums require. The menials work in conditions that the Imperium's labor laws, such as they are, do not apply to. The Mechanicus's autonomy extending to the governance of its workforce, and the Mechanicus's governance resembling less a labor system and more a feudal serfdom. The Ring of Iron, Mars's orbital shipyard complex, is one of the largest construction facilities in the galaxy. A belt of docking platforms and assembly bays that encircles the planet, and that produces warships for the Imperial Navy, transports for the Astra Militarum, and the specialized vessels that the Mechanicus's own fleets require. Other forge worlds are scattered across the galaxy, each one a node in the Mechanicus's manufacturing network, each one producing the technology that the Imperium's insatiable demand for war material requires. Metallica, the planet that marches, whose mobile manufactorums follow the Mechanicus's armies into combat, producing ammunition and replacement parts in the field.
Riser, whose specialization in plasma technology has made the Forge world the primary producer of the Imperium's most powerful energy weapons. Styges 8, whose proximity to alien civilizations and whose willingness to study Xenos technology has earned the Forge world both the Inquisition's suspicion and the Mechanicus's grudging respect. Graia, whose industrial output and whose devotion to orthodoxy have made the Forge world a model of the Mechanicus's ideal.
Each Forge world is autonomous within the Mechanicus's hierarchy, governed by its own fabricator, operating according to its own traditions and interpretations of the cult Mechanicus's doctrine. The autonomy produces diversity, a range of approaches to the Mechanicus's core mission that reflects the different environments, the different histories,
and the different personalities of the tech priests who lead each world. The diversity of the Forge worlds produces a Mechanicus that is far less monolithic than its reputation suggests. The stereotypical image of the Mechanicus, a legion of identical robed cyborgs chanting in binary, does not capture the reality of an organization whose constituent worlds have developed distinct cultures,
traditions, and approaches to the machine god's worship over millennia of autonomous operation. Mars is the standard, the template against which all other Forge worlds measure themselves. The Martian orthodoxy is the most conservative interpretation of the cult Mechanicus's doctrine, the most resistant to innovation, the most insistent on the faithful preservation of inherited knowledge. Mars's tech priests view themselves as the custodians of the machine god's purest teachings, and the custodianship produces a culture of rigidity that the Mechanicus's other Forge worlds find both admirable and suffocating. Metallica is the Forge world that marches. Metallica's tech priests have developed a culture of military activism that exceeds what the Mechanicus's other worlds typically display. The Forge world's manufactorum's designed to be mobile, capable of deploying alongside the Mechanicus's military forces and producing equipment in the field. Metallica's approach reflects a practical recognition that wars are won by logistics as much as by combat, and the Forge world's ability to supply its armies in real time gives Metallica's forces a sustained operational capability that other Forge worlds' armies cannot match. Ryza's specialization in plasma technology has made the Forge world the Imperium's primary producer of plasma weapons and plasma reactors, the energy technology that powers the Imperium's most advanced weapons and its largest warships. Ryza's tech priests have accumulated an expertise in plasma engineering that exceeds what any other Forge world can claim, and the expertise produces weapons whose power and reliability give the Forge world a reputation for excellence that the rest of the Mechanicus acknowledges. Styges 8 is the Forge world that makes the Inquisition nervous. Located near the Eye of Terror, Styges 8's tech priests have developed a tolerance for the study of alien technology that the Mechanicus's orthodoxy considers dangerous, and that the Inquisition considers heretical. The Xenorites, the faction within Styges 8's hierarchy that advocates for the study of Xenos technology, argue that the machine god's knowledge is not limited to human technology, and that the alien civilizations that the Imperium encounters possess understanding that the Mechanicus should study rather than destroy. The argument is theologically daring. The argument is also practically compelling, because the galaxy's alien civilizations, particularly the Eldari and the Necrons, possess technologies that exceed what the Mechanicus's own knowledge can produce. And the study of those technologies could provide insights that the Mechanicus's orthodoxy would never arrive at through the recovery of pre-strife human technology alone. Grea's devotion to orthodoxy is absolute. The Forge world's tech priests maintaining the Mechanicus's traditional practices with a ferocity that makes Mars's conservatism look permissive. Greya has been the target of multiple invasions, including orc attacks and chaos incursions. And the Forge world's resilience in the face of these attacks has been cited by its defenders as evidence that the orthodox approach to the machine god's worship produces a spiritual resilience that innovation would undermine. The autonomy also produces conflict. The Forge worlds compete with each other for resources, for prestige, for the favor of the fabricator general of Mars. The competition is intense, sometimes violent. The Forge Worlds deploying their military forces against each other in disputes that the broader Imperium watches with the nervous attention of a spectator at a fight between allies. The Skitarii are the Mechanicus' soldiers, the military forces that protect the Forge Worlds, escort the explorator fleets, and fight alongside the Imperium's other military branches in the wars that the galaxy's threats demand. A Skitarius is not a normal soldier.
A Skitarius is a human being who has been augmented with cybernetic enhancements that push the boundary between human and machine to a degree that exceeds what even the tech priest's own augmentations typically achieve. The Skitari's biological components, the organs and the tissue and the neural networks that make the soldier a living being,
are supplemented and partially replaced with mechanical systems that enhance every aspect of the soldier's military capability. The augmentations are extensive. Enhanced vision, including the ability to see across the electromagnetic spectrum. Enhanced hearing, calibrated to detect the sounds of enemy movement across distances that unaugmented ears cannot process. Enhanced musculature, the biological muscles reinforced with synthetic fibers that increase strength without increasing mass. Neural interfaces that allow the Skitarius to receive commands directly from the tech priest commanders who direct the Skitari's operations. The orders transmitted as data packets that bypass the delays of verbal communication and that coordinate the Skitari's movements with a precision that conventional military formations cannot match. The Skitarii fight with weapons that are produced by the Forge Worlds they serve, and the weapons reflect the Mechanicus' technological sophistication. The galvanic rifle, a weapon whose electromagnetic discharge can disable electronics and organic neural systems simultaneously. The radium carbine, a weapon whose ammunition is laced with radioactive isotopes that contaminate the enemy even if the initial wound is not fatal. The arc weapons, devices that project electrical discharges capable of overloading and destroying electronic systems, and that are particularly effective against enemy vehicles and fortifications. The Skitarii are organized into legions, massive military formations that can number in the tens of thousands, and that operate under the direct command of the tech priests who control the Forge World that the legion serves. The legions are named, numbered, and maintained with the same meticulous attention that the Mechanicus devotes to its machines. Each soldier's augmentations recorded, calibrated, and maintained according to protocols that the Forge World's tech priests have developed over centuries of operational experience. The Skitari's loyalty is absolute. The neural interfaces that connect the soldiers to their commanders ensure that the Skitarii follow orders without hesitation, without question, without the individual judgment that conventional soldiers apply to the commands they receive. A Skitarius does not evaluate an order's morality. A Skitarius does not assess an order's tactical wisdom. A Skitarius receives the order and executes it, the augmented body performing the commanded action with the mechanical precision that the cybernetic enhancements provide. The Skitarii Rangers and the Skitarii Vanguard represent the two primary variants of the Mechanicus' augmented soldiers, and the distinction between them reflects the different tactical roles that the Mechanicus assigns to its military forces. The Rangers are the Mechanicus' long-range specialists, soldiers whose augmentations favor precision over aggression, and whose deployment typically places them in positions where their marksmanship and their patience can be exploited. A ranger's optical augmentations allow the soldier to identify and engage targets at distances that exceed what unaugmented human vision can process.
And the galvanic rifles that the rangers carry are designed to exploit this capability, producing electromagnetic discharges that can disable or destroy targets across ranges that conventional infantry weapons cannot reach.
The vanguard are the Mechanicus' assault troops, soldiers whose augmentations favor resilience and aggression, and whose deployment places them at the point of contact with the enemy. The vanguard carry radium weapons, firearms whose ammunition is laced with radioactive isotopes that contaminate the environment and the enemy simultaneously. The vanguard's own augmentations protect them from the radiation that their weapons produce, but the soldiers in the vanguard's vicinity, including allied forces who are not augmented for radiation resistance, are not protected, and the vanguard's deployment produces a zone of radioactive contamination that makes the augmented soldiers dangerous to friend and foe alike.
The Iron Striders and the Sidonian Dragoons provide the Skitarii with mobile fire support, bipedal walkers that carry heavy weapons and that move across the battlefield with a speed and an agility that the Skitarii's infantry formations cannot match.
The walkers are controlled by pilots whose neural interfaces allow them to operate the machines with the fluency that the manifold provides to Titan Princeps, though on a vastly smaller scale. The absence of individual judgment is deliberate. The Mechanicus views the Skitarii not as soldiers in the conventional sense, but as extensions of the tech priest commander's will. Biological machines that translate the commander's intentions into physical action. The dehumanization is inherent in the concept. The Skitarii's augmentations reducing the soldier from a person who follows orders to a tool that executes commands. The Kataphron battle servitors are the Mechanicus' heavy infantry, servitor constructs that are larger and more heavily armed than the standard Skitarii. The Kataphrons are built on tracked chassis, their biological components reduced to the minimum necessary to qualify the construct as a servitor rather than as a prohibited autonomous machine. Their weapons drawn from the Mechanicus' heaviest infantry scale armament. The Kataphron breachers carry torsion cannons and hydraulic claws, close-range weapons designed to breach fortifications and to destroy armored targets at point-blank range.
The Kataphron destroyers carry plasma culverins and grav cannons, heavy weapons that provide the long-range fire support that the Skitarii's lighter armaments cannot match. The Omega Dunecrawler is the Mechanicus' primary armored vehicle, a walking gun platform that provides the mobile firepower that the Skitarii legions require. The Dunecrawler carries a variety of weapon systems, from the neutron laser that can destroy enemy armor at extreme range to the Icarus array that provides anti-aircraft capability against enemy flyers. The Mechanicus' military capability, when fully deployed, represents a force that can compete with the Imperium's other military institutions in terms of both firepower and tactical sophistication. The combination of augmented infantry, heavy servitor constructs, walking gun platforms, night walkers, and Titan god machines produces a military force whose range of capabilities exceeds what any other single institution in the Imperium can field. The Skitarii are effective. The combination of cybernetic enhancement, sophisticated weaponry, and the precise coordination that the neural interfaces provide produces military formations that are among the most dangerous in the Imperium's arsenal. A Skitarii legion in the field is a terrifying sight. Thousands of augmented soldiers moving in perfect synchronization, their weapons firing in coordinated volleys that maximize the destruction inflicted on the enemy. Their advance proceeding with the relentless mechanical precision of a machine that has been programmed to achieve an objective, and that will not stop until the objective is achieved or the machine is destroyed. The Titan legions are the Mechanicus' most powerful military asset, and the Titans themselves are the most terrifying weapons that humanity has ever produced. A Titan is a war machine. This description does not convey the scale. A Warlord-class battle Titan stands over 100 feet tall, a bipedal fortress whose weapon systems can level cities and whose void shields can absorb fire that would destroy conventional armored vehicles. An Imperator-class Emperor Titan is larger still, a walking cathedral whose weapon mounts include weapons capable of engaging targets in orbit and whose fortress-like superstructure houses defensive garrisons and shrine-like command centers. The Titans are not merely machines. In the Mechanicus' theology, the Titans are the most sacred of all the machine gods' creations. War machines whose power is so immense, whose complexity is so vast, whose capabilities are so far beyond what ordinary technology can achieve, that the Titans are treated as living embodiments of the machine god's will. Each Titan has a machine spirit. The machine spirit is the Mechanicus' term for the artificial intelligence or the quasi-intelligence that inhabits the Titan systems and that gives the war machine its personality, its temperament, its will. The Mechanicus does not call it artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is forbidden, an abomination that the Emperor prohibited and that the Mechanicus' own history teaches is dangerous. The Mechanicus calls it a machine spirit, and the distinction between a machine spirit and an artificial intelligence is a distinction that the Mechanicus maintains with fierce, theologically motivated insistence, and that outside observers find increasingly difficult to sustain. The machine spirits of the oldest Titans are powerful, developed over centuries of operation into complex, semi-autonomous consciousnesses that the Titan's crew must negotiate with rather than command. A Titan Princeps, the officer who commands a Titan through a neural link called the Manifold, does not simply tell the Titan what to do. The Princeps must merge their consciousness with the machine spirit, forming a hybrid awareness that combines the Princeps' tactical judgment with the Titan's vast sensory capability and its instinctive understanding of its own weapon systems. The Manifold, the neural interface that connects the Princeps to the Titan, is one of the most remarkably sophisticated and ancient pieces of technology that the Mechanicus possesses, and the connection it produces is unlike anything else in the Imperium's technological arsenal. When the Princeps connects, the world changes. The officer's senses expand to encompass the Titan's sensor arrays, the human consciousness suddenly processing visual data from cameras mounted across the god machine's vast frame, audio data from microphones that can detect the rumble of an enemy formation kilometers away, and the proprioceptive data that tells the Princeps where the Titan's limbs are and how the Titan's weight is distributed across its massive feet. The expansion is overwhelming. The human brain was not designed to process the volume of sensory data that the Titan systems generate, and the first moments of connection are a storm of input that the Princeps must learn to filter, to prioritize, to manage through the mental disciplines that the Collegia Titanicus training provides. The Princeps who masters the connection becomes, for the duration of the engagement, a giant,
The officer feels the ground beneath the Titan's feet. The officer feels the weapon's fire that impacts the Titan's void shield. The officer feels the recoil of the Titan's weapons as they discharge. The massive guns sending shockwaves through the god machine's frame that the Princeps experiences as physical sensations through the neural link. The experience is addictive. The power of commanding a Titan. The sensation of moving through the world as a being of immense strength and devastating capability produces a psychological dependence that the Collegia Titanica acknowledges but cannot prevent. The Princeps who serves aboard a Titan for years develops a craving for the connection, a need for the expanded consciousness that the manifold provides. And the craving makes disconnection from the Titan painful. The return to the limited senses and the fragile body of a normal human experienced as a diminishment that the Princeps resents with increasing intensity. The merging is dangerous. The machine's spirit is powerful, and the Titan's consciousness can overwhelm the Princeps' human mind, absorbing the officer's identity into the machine's awareness, and leaving behind a Princeps who is no longer entirely human, a being whose thoughts and desires have been shaped by the Titan's own machine nature. The most experienced Princeps, the officers who have served aboard their Titans for decades, display personality changes that reflect their Titan's character: increased aggression, decreased empathy, a growing preference for the Titan's metallic embrace over the warmth of human company. The Collegia Titanica, the organization that maintains and deploys the Titan legions, is one of the Mechanicus's most prestigious and most secretive divisions. The Titan legions, each one named and each one carrying a history that stretches back thousands of years, are deployed only in the most critical engagements, their presence on a battlefield indicating that the Mechanicus has committed its most powerful weapons to the fight. The Collegia Titanica's internal culture is as insular and as tradition-bound as the Mechanicus itself, the Titan legions maintaining their own customs, their own rivalries, and their own honor codes that govern the god machine's deployment and combat. Each Titan within a legion carries a name, and the name carries a history. The name is not merely a designation, it is a chronicle, a record of every battle the Titan has fought, every enemy it has destroyed, every Princeps who has commanded it across the centuries of its existence. The most ancient Titans carry names that echo through 10 millennia of Imperial history, their deeds recorded in the annals of the Collegia with the reverence that the Mechanicus reserves for its holiest artifacts. The Princeps who command the Titans are among the most honored and the most psychologically damaged warriors in the Imperium. The neural link that connects the Princeps to the Titan's machine spirit subjects the officer to pressures that no other military commander faces. The constant awareness of the Titan's vast power, the seductive pull of the machine spirit's consciousness, the progressive erosion of the Princeps' human identity as the link between human and machine deepens over years of service. The Moderati, the secondary officers who assist the Princeps in controlling the Titan's systems, and the Sensori who manage the Titan's sensor arrays, form the crew that keeps the god machine operational. But the Princeps is the consciousness that drives the Titan. The human mind that merges with the machine spirit to produce the hybrid awareness that makes a Titan more than a mere vehicle. The Legio Ignatum, the fire wasps, the Legio Metallica, the iron skulls, the Legio Mortis, the death's heads, The names of the Titan legions carry a weight of history and a promise of devastation that makes them the most feared military formations in the galaxy.
The deployment of a Titan is announced. The Collegiate Titanicus traditions require that the enemy be informed through Vox broadcast and through the symbolic sounding of the Titan's war horn that a god machine is entering the field. The announcement is not courtesy.
The announcement is a weapon. The psychological impact of the Titan's arrival, amplified by the formal declaration that gives the enemy a moment to comprehend what they are about to face. The war horns of a Titan legion are among the most terrifying sounds in the galaxy. Each Titan carries a horn whose blast can be heard across kilometers, and the combined horns of a full Titan legion produce a wall of sound that disrupts communications, shatters morale, and announces with undeniable authority that the god machines have come and that the landscape is about to change. The crews who serve aboard Titans live in their machines for extended periods during campaigns. The Titan's internal compartments providing living quarters, maintenance facilities, and command centers that allow the crew to operate the god machine without returning to base. The life aboard a Titan is claustrophobic, intense, and permeated by the machine's spirit's presence, the crew's every waking moment shaped by the awareness that they are living inside a consciousness that is older than they are and that will outlast them. The relationship between crew and Titan produces a bond that the Collegiate Titanica considers sacred. The Titan knows its crew. The machine's spirit responds to familiar voices, familiar commands, familiar patterns of operation that the crew has developed over years of service. A new crew assigned to an established Titan must earn the machine's spirit's acceptance. A process that can take months and that occasionally fails, the machine spirit rejecting the new crew in ways that manifest as malfunctions, misfires, and the general bloody-mindedness that a complex machine can display when it is not satisfied with the people who are trying to command it. When the Titans walk, the ground shakes. When the Titans fire, cities burn. When the Titans die, which happens rarely but which happens with a spectacular, catastrophic violence that matches the scale of the machines themselves, the destruction can rival a nuclear detonation. The schism of Mars is the wound that the Mechanicus carries from the Horus heresy, a civil war within the Mechanicum that mirrored the broader conflict that tore the Imperium apart. When Horus fell, when the War Master turned against the Emperor and launched the rebellion that would consume the galaxy, the Mechanicum was divided. The Fabricator General of Mars, Kelbor Hal, declared his allegiance to Horus, seduced by the promise of access to forbidden technologies that the Emperor had prohibited, and that Horus, through the influence of the Chaos Gods, offered to unlock. The promise was irresistible to a faction within the Mechanicum that had always resented the Emperor's prohibition on certain avenues of research. The Emperor had forbidden artificial intelligence. The Emperor had forbidden the development of certain weapons. The Emperor had imposed constraints on the Mechanicum's research that the most ambitious tech priests viewed as arbitrary restrictions on the pursuit of knowledge that the machine god commanded. Horus offered freedom. Horus offered the removal of the Emperor's restrictions, the liberation of the Mechanicum's research from the constraints that the Treaty of Mars had imposed. The offer appealed to the tech priests whose ambition exceeded their loyalty, whose desire for knowledge exceeded their commitment to the Imperium, and whose theological positions allowed them to interpret the Emperor's restrictions as violations of the machine god's mandate. Mars split the loyalist tech priests who maintained their allegiance to the Emperor and to the treaty that had united Mars and Terra, fought the traitor tech priests who had declared for Horus. Skitari legions battled each other in the corridors and the manufactorums of the Red Planet. Titans dueled on the plains of Mars, the god machines of the Legio Mortis fighting the god machines of the Legio Ignatum in engagements that scarred the landscape for millennia. The fighting was devastating. Mars, the most important industrial world in the galaxy, was consumed by a civil war that destroyed manufacturing capacity that the Imperium desperately needed, that killed tech priests whose knowledge could not be replaced, and that demonstrated with horrifying clarity the consequences of the Mechanicum's internal divisions. The fighting on Mars during the Schism was characterized by the unique horrors that a technological civil war produces. Skitari legions, augmented soldiers whose cybernetic enhancements made them dependent on the tech priests who controlled their systems, found themselves fighting against formations that were augmented by the same technology and that were equally dangerous. The Titan battles on Mars were the most destructive engagements of the Schism. The traitor Legio Mortis, the Death's Heads, whose ancient god machines had walked Mars's plains since before the Emperor's arrival, turned their weapons against the loyalist Legio Ignatum, the Fire Wasps, and the resulting duels scarred Mars's surface with craters and debris fields that remain visible 10,000 years later. The fighting extended into Mars's underhive, the vast network of tunnels and chambers that extended beneath the planet's surface. In the darkness below the manufactorums, tech priests fought tech priests in close quarters combat that was as much a war of hacking and counter-hacking as it was a war of physical violence. The combatants attempting to override each other's augmentations, to seize control of each other's mechanical systems, to turn each other's bodies into weapons against their owners. The scrap code was the Schism's most insidious weapon. The traitor tech priests, corrupted by the influence of the Chaos Gods, developed a form of malicious data that could infect the machine systems of the loyalist forces, corrupting their cogitators, disrupting their communications, and turning their own equipment against them. The scrap code spread through Mars's data networks like a plague, corrupting systems that had been reliable for centuries and producing cascading failures that amplified the damage of the conventional military operations. The loyalists survived. The traitors were driven from Mars, retreating into the Eye of Terror alongside the other forces that had followed Horus into damnation. The Mechanicum was reformed, reborn as the Adeptus Mechanicus, its loyalty to the Emperor reaffirmed, and its organizational structure adjusted to prevent the kind of schism that the heresy had produced. The Schism's resolution produced the formal separation between the loyalist Mechanicum and the traitors. The loyalist faction, led by fabricator General Zagreus Kane, reformed the organization as the Adeptus Mechanicus, a new institution whose loyalty to the Emperor was reaffirmed, and whose organizational structure was adjusted to prevent the kind of internal division that had produced the Schism. The Reformation was not smooth. The Mechanicum's parliament on Mars resisted the changes that the post-heresy political environment demanded, and the Collegia Titanicas intervention, including the memorable moment when an Imperator-class Titan of the Legio Ignatum marched on the great chamber of the Senatorum Imperialis to break a political deadlock, was required to force the institutional reforms through. The casualties of the Schism were measured not merely in bodies but in knowledge. Every tech priest who died took their expertise with them. Every forge that was destroyed took its production templates with it. Every archive that was corrupted by the scrap code took its accumulated records with it. The schism's destruction was not merely physical but intellectual. A catastrophic loss of knowledge that accelerated the decline that the Mechanicus was already experiencing and that the organization has never fully recovered from. The loss extended beyond Mars. Forge worlds across the galaxy chose sides during the heresy, and the Forge worlds that chose the traitor's side took their knowledge with them when they fled into the Eye of Terror. The Mechanicus lost access to entire branches of technological knowledge when the traitor Forge worlds departed, the knowledge preserved by the Dark Mechanicum and denied to the Loyalist organization. The reconstruction that followed the schism was the most ambitious project that the Mechanicus undertook since the Treaty of Mars. The Loyalist tech priests rebuilt Mars's damaged manufactorums, restored the corrupted data archives, and reassembled the organizational structure that the Civil War had shattered. The reconstruction took centuries, and the result was an institution that was functional but diminished, capable but incomplete. A shadow of the pre-heresy Mechanicum whose capabilities the post-heresy Adeptus Mechanicus has never matched. The reformed Adeptus Mechanicus retained the autonomy that the Treaty of Mars had guaranteed, but the autonomy was tempered by the awareness that the Mechanicus's internal divisions had contributed to the heresy's devastation. The new institution was more centralized, more responsive to the Imperium's needs, and more aware of the political realities that the post-heresy galaxy demanded. The traitors became the Dark Mechanicum. In the Eye of Terror, freed from the Emperor's restrictions, the Dark Mechanicum pursued the forbidden technologies that the Loyalist Mechanicus would not touch. Artificial intelligence, daemon binding, the fusion of machine and warp energy that produces weapons of terrible power and terrible instability. The Dark Mechanicum became a mirror of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a civilization of tech priests whose faith in the machine god had been corrupted by chaos into something darker, something more dangerous. Something that the Loyalist Mechanicus views with a horror that combines theological revulsion with professional jealousy. The Dark Mechanicum's forge worlds within the Eye of Terror are nightmares of industry. Planets where the boundary between machine and daemon has been dissolved, and where the technology that the Loyalist Mechanicus would consider blasphemous is produced with a casual disregard for the theological prohibitions that constrain the Loyalist tech priests. The daemon engines are the Dark Mechanicum's most recognizable creation, war machines that combine mechanical systems with demonic entities, producing weapons that are powered not by conventional energy sources, but by the warp energy that the bound daemon provides. A daemon engine is partially alive, the machine's systems animated by the daemon's consciousness, producing a war machine that fights not merely with the weapons its builders installed, but with the malice and the cunning of the warp entity that inhabits it. The Defiler, the Mauler Fiend, the Forge Fiend, the Helldrake, these are the daemon engines that the Dark Mechanicum produces, and that the traitor legions deploy against the Imperium. Each one is a perversion of the Mechanicus's principles. A machine whose power derives not from the sacred technology that the machine god provides, but from the blasphemous fusion of technology and chaos that the Dark Mechanicum has mastered. The Dark Mechanicum also produces the war machines and the equipment that the Chaos Space Marines require, serving as the traitor force's equivalent of the Loyalist Mechanicus. Without the Dark Mechanicum, the traitor legions could not maintain their equipment, could not produce new weapons, could not sustain the military operations that 10,000 years of warfare against the Imperium have demanded. The professional jealousy is the detail that the Mechanicus does not discuss. The Dark Mechanicum innovates. The Dark Mechanicum creates new technologies, develops new weapons, pushes the boundaries of what is possible with an abandon that the Loyalist Mechanicus cannot match, because the Loyalist Mechanicus is bound by the restrictions that the Emperor imposed, and that the Cult Mechanicus's orthodoxy enforces.
The Mechanicus's relationship with the broader Imperium is the most important and the most fragile political alliance in the galaxy. The alliance is symbiotic. The Imperium needs the Mechanicus's technology. The Mechanicus needs the Imperium's military protection and its access to the resources that the Mechanicus's operations require. Neither party can survive without the other, and the mutual dependence creates a relationship that is characterized by cooperation on the surface and by tension underneath.
The tension stems from the fundamental incompatibility between the Mechanicus's theology and the Imperium's. The Mechanicus worships the machine god. The Imperium worships the Emperor. The Mechanicus believes that knowledge is sacred. The Imperium believes that the Emperor is sacred. The theological conflict is managed through the convenient fiction that the Emperor is the Omnissiah,
the machine god's avatar in the physical world, a fiction that allows both parties to claim that they are worshipping the same deity while maintaining fundamentally different beliefs about what that deity represents. The theological conflict between the Mechanicus and the ecclesiarchy is managed through a combination of political pragmatism and deliberate ambiguity.
The Mechanicus's worship of the machine god and the ecclesiarchy's worship of the Emperor are, in practice, compatible. The Mechanicus declares the Emperor to be the Omnissiah, the physical avatar of the machine god. And the ecclesiarchy accepts this formulation because the alternative, declaring the Mechanicus heretical, would produce a schism that the Imperium cannot survive. The compatibility is superficial. Beneath the surface, the two faiths are fundamentally different in their understanding of divinity, their approach to worship, and their conception of the relationship between humanity and the sacred. The ecclesiarchy teaches that humanity is the Emperor's chosen species, that the human body is sacred, and that the Emperor protects humanity through his divine will. The Mechanicus teaches that knowledge is sacred, that the human body is inferior to the machine, and that the machine god provides guidance through the technology that humanity creates. The differences produce friction that the political accommodation cannot entirely suppress.
Ecclesiarchy officials who encounter the Mechanicus's practices, who witness the tech priests' progressive dehumanization, who observe the rituals that the Mechanicus performs in the service of a deity that the ecclesiarchy considers at best a subordinate aspect of the Emperor and at worst a heretical fabrication, struggle to maintain the diplomatic restraint that the political situation requires.
The Mechanicus's vulnerability to chaos corruption is another source of tension between the tech priesthood and the Imperium's other institutions. The Dark Mechanicum's existence proves that the Mechanicus's faith does not provide immunity to chaos's influence, and the tech priests' progressive replacement of their biological components with machinery creates a unique vulnerability. A tech priest whose augmentations are corrupted by the warp's influence may not realize the corruption has occurred. The malicious code hiding within the mechanical systems that the tech priest's consciousness depends on for processing. The scrap code that the Dark Mechanicum developed during the Schism of Mars remains a threat, a form of demonic malware that can infect the Mechanicus' systems, and that the tech priest's security protocols struggle to detect. A forge world whose data networks are infected with scrap code may not realize the infection until the corruption has spread through every connected system, producing cascading failures that can cripple the forge world's production, and that can compromise the military forces that the forge world supplies. The fiction works. Mostly, the ecclesiarchy, the Imperium's official church, occasionally challenges the Mechanicus' theological autonomy, arguing that the worship of the machine god is heretical, and that the Mechanicus should be brought under the ecclesiarchy's authority. The challenges are always rebuffed, because the political consequences of alienating the Mechanicus exceed any theological benefit that the ecclesiarchy might gain, and because the Treaty of Mars explicitly protects the Mechanicus' right to practice its faith. The Mechanicus' monopoly on technology gives the organization a leverage over the Imperium that no other institution possesses. The Imperium cannot build weapons without the Mechanicus. The Imperium cannot maintain its infrastructure without the Mechanicus. The Imperium cannot wage war without the Mechanicus' forge world supplying the ammunition, the vehicles, the ships, and the war machines that the Imperium's armies require. The monopoly is maintained through the deliberate restriction of technological knowledge. The Mechanicus does not teach its methods. The Mechanicus does not explain how its machines work. The Mechanicus provides the machines and the tech priests who maintain them. And the Imperium accepts the machines and the tech priests without understanding the principles that the machines embody, because the alternative, attempting to develop an independent technological capability, would require the Imperium to invest resources that it cannot spare, and to develop expertise that the Mechanicus would actively suppress. The political dynamics between the Mechanicus and the broader Imperium produce a relationship that is simultaneously cooperative and adversarial, a partnership whose participants need each other and who resent the need in approximately equal measure. The Administratum views the Mechanicus with a mixture of dependence and frustration. The bureaucrats who govern the Imperium understand that the Mechanicus' cooperation is essential, and the understanding produces a deference that the Administratum shows toward no other institution. The Administratum does not issue orders to the Mechanicus. The Administratum requests. The Administratum negotiates. The Administratum presents its requirements with the diplomatic care of a government that is asking a favor from an entity that could, if sufficiently provoked, simply stop providing the technology that the government's survival depends on. The Inquisition views the Mechanicus with suspicion. The Inquisitors who monitor the Mechanicus' activities see an organization whose theological independence, whose monopoly on technology, and whose secretive culture produce conditions that are ripe for heresy, for the kind of corruption that the Inquisition is charged with preventing. The Inquisition investigates the Mechanicus periodically, probing the organization's practices for evidence of the heresies that the Inquisitors believe the Mechanicus' structure makes inevitable. The investigations rarely produce results, not because the Mechanicus is clean, but because the Mechanicus is powerful enough to resist the Inquisition's intrusions, and because the political consequences of a full-scale inquisitorial investigation into the Mechanicus would be catastrophic for the Imperium. The Space Marine chapters view the Mechanicus with the pragmatic acceptance of warriors who depend on the tech priests for the maintenance of the equipment that keeps them alive. A Space Marine chapter cannot function without tech marines. the Space Marines who are trained by the Mechanicus in the maintenance and repair of the chapter's equipment.
The Tech Marines serve a dual loyalty, sworn to their chapter but trained by the Mechanicus, and the dual loyalty produces a figure whose position within the chapter is essential, but whose connections to the Mechanicus make the chapter's other warriors uneasy. The Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum, depends on the Mechanicus for everything, the last guns that the Guardsmen carry.
The chimeras that transport them, the Lehman Russ battle tanks that support their advances, and the ammunition that all of these weapons consume. The relationship between the Mechanicus and the Astra Militarum is the most common interface between the tech priesthood and the Imperium's broader military, and the interface reveals the cultural gap between the two institutions with uncomfortable clarity. A guardsman views their last gun as a tool, a weapon that the soldier maintains through the basic procedures that the regiment's training has provided: cleaning, inspection, the replacement of power cells. The kind of maintenance that a soldier with no engineering training can perform. The guardsman does not pray to the weapon. The guardsman does not apply sacred oils or recite activation litanies or address the weapon's machine spirit with the reverence that the Mechanicus's theology demands. An engineer who observes a guardsman maintaining their weapon in this manner is simultaneously appalled and resigned. Appalled because the guardsman's maintenance is, by the Mechanicus's standards, blasphemous, a crude manipulation of sacred technology that ignores the spiritual dimensions of the machine's existence. Resigned because the guardsman's maintenance works, or at least works well enough to keep the weapon functional, and because the engineer cannot compel the entire Astra Militarum to adopt the Mechanicus's maintenance rituals without bringing the Imperium's military operations to a halt. The tension between the engineer and the guardsman is a microcosm of the tension between the Mechanicus and the broader Imperium. The Mechanicus knows that its methods are superior. The Imperium knows that its methods are sufficient, and the gap between superior and sufficient is the gap that defines the relationship between the two institutions. A guard regiment without Mechanicus support is a guard regiment that will cease to function within weeks. The equipment degrading, the weapons jamming, the vehicles breaking down without the tech priests whose rituals and whose expertise keep the machinery operational. The engineers are the Mechanicus's most visible presence within the Imperium's other institutions. Engineers are tech priests who are assigned to the Imperial Guard, the Imperial Navy, and other Imperial organizations to maintain the technology that those organizations employ. An engineer attached to a guard regiment maintains the regiment's vehicles, repairs damaged equipment, and performs the rituals that the cult Mechanicus requires before a machine can be activated or deployed. The Mechanicus's approach to technology is simultaneously sophisticated and primitive, a combination that reflects the organization's unique position as a technological civilization that has lost the understanding that produced its technology. A tech priest who maintains a plasma reactor does not understand plasma physics in the way that the Dark Ages engineers understood it. The tech priest knows the rituals, the sequence of prayers that must be recited before the reactor is activated, the sacred oils that must be applied to the cooling system's junctions, the binary current that must be transmitted to the reactor's machine spirit to ensure the spirit's cooperation. The tech priest knows the rituals because the rituals work, because following the prescribed sequence of steps produces a functional reactor, and deviating from the prescribed sequence produces a reactor that malfunctions. And the tech priest does not question why the rituals work because The questioning is not permitted. The rituals encode the knowledge. This is the detail that the Mechanicus's critics often miss.
The prayers, the oils, the cant are not arbitrary superstitions applied to a technological process. They are the process, the maintenance procedures that the Dark Ages engineers developed, encoded in a form that survives the loss of the theoretical understanding that produced them.
The oil that the tech priest applies to the cooling junction is a lubricant whose chemical properties the tech priest may not understand, but that the junction requires for proper function. The prayer that the tech priest recites during activation is a sequence of system checks, verbalized in a form that the tech priest has memorized, that verifies the reactor's readiness before the activation sequence begins. The encoding is brilliant and tragic. Brilliant because it preserves functional knowledge across millennia of cultural disruption, allowing a tech priest who does not understand plasma physics to maintain a plasma reactor through the faithful replication of memorized procedures. Tragic because the encoding destroys the understanding that produced the knowledge, replacing comprehension with ritual and ensuring that the knowledge cannot be adapted, modified, or improved. Because the person performing the procedures does not understand the principles that the procedures embody. The rituals are not merely ceremonial. The Mechanicus teaches that machines have spirits, that every device, from the simplest las gun to the most complex void ship, contains a consciousness that must be respected, placated, and properly addressed if the machine is to function correctly. The rituals, the prayers, the application of sacred oils, the recitation of activation litanies are the methods by which the tech priest communicates with the machine's spirit and ensures that the spirit is cooperative. Whether the machine's spirits are real is another question that the law does not definitively resolve. The Mechanicus believes that they are. The evidence is ambiguous. Machines that have been properly ritually maintained do seem to function more reliably than machines that have not. But whether this is because the rituals actually communicate with the machine's spirit, or because the rituals ensure that the tech priest performs the practical maintenance steps that the rituals encode, is a question that the Mechanicus does not permit to be asked. The machine's spirits may be real. The machine's spirits may be a theological interpretation of the complex software and the emergent behaviors that sophisticated machines produce. The machine's spirits may be something in between. The residual patterns of the artificial intelligences that the Dark Age of technology created, and that the Mechanicus has inherited without understanding their nature. The explorator fleets are the Mechanicus's most romantic institution, the expeditionary forces that the organization sends into the galaxy's unmapped regions in search of the lost technologies that the Mechanicus's faith demands they recover. An explorator fleet is a self-contained expedition, a collection of warships, research vessels, and transport craft that carries tech priests, skitari, servitors, and the support personnel that a long-range expedition requires into regions of the galaxy that the Imperium has not explored, or that were explored and abandoned, or that were lost during the Age of Strife and that may still contain the remnants of the pre-Strife civilizations that the Mechanicus is desperate to salvage. The explorator fleets search for STCs. This is their primary mission, the objective that justifies the enormous investment of resources that each fleet represents. But the fleets also search for any technology that the Mechanicus can recover and integrate into its knowledge base. Weapons, tools, materials, manufacturing techniques. Anything that represents an advancement over the Mechanicus's current capabilities, or that fills a gap in the Mechanicus's understanding of the technologies it already possesses. The searches are dangerous. The galaxy's unexplored regions contain threats that range from the hostile alien civilizations that inhabit the galaxy's edges to the warp phenomena that make interstellar travel unpredictable and that can consume an entire fleet without warning. The explorator fleets are armed, escorted by Skitari legions and sometimes by Titan detachments, prepared for the combat that the galaxy's hostile environment almost inevitably produces. The explorator Magos who leads each fleet is typically an archmagos of extraordinary experience, a tech priest whose augmentations have been optimized for the rigors of deep space exploration, and whose knowledge of the Mechanicus's archives allows them to identify the signatures of pre-strife technology across the electromagnetic spectrum. The fleets can be gone for decades. The distances involved, the warp's unpredictability, and the thoroughness that the Mechanicus demands of its expeditions produce missions whose duration exceeds what conventional military deployments would tolerate. An explorator fleet that departs a forge world on a mission to survey a newly discovered star system may not return for 20, 50, or 100 years. The tech priests and the Skitari aboard, sustained by the fleet's own production capabilities and by the augmentations that reduce the biological needs that would otherwise limit the expedition's duration. The explorator fleets have made discoveries that have shaped the Imperium's history. Magos Arkan Land, whose explorations beneath the surface of Mars uncovered STC fragments containing the templates for the Land Raider battle tank and the Land Speeder, is perhaps the most famous explorator in the Mechanicus's history. His discoveries providing the Imperium with vehicles that have served as the backbone of the Space Marine chapter's armored capabilities for 10 millennia. Other explorator discoveries have been equally significant, though less celebrated. The recovery of an STC fragment for a type of combat knife produced a blade that became standard issue across the Astra Militarum, the discovery earning its finder a place in the Mechanicus's Hall of Heroes, and the fragment earning the reverence of a holy relic. The absurdity of the Mechanicus's priorities is revealed in these discoveries. A combat knife, a type of paint, a chemical compound for cleaning power armor joints. These are the discoveries that the Mechanicus celebrates with the fervor of religious revelation, and the celebration is proportional not to the discovery's practical significance, but to the discovery's theological significance. Any recovery of lost knowledge is holy, regardless of whether the recovered knowledge is practically important. The absurdity conceals a truth. The Mechanicus celebrates every discovery because every discovery proves that the past's knowledge still exists, that the machine god's legacy has not been entirely consumed by time, and that the faith that drives the explorator fleets across the galaxy is justified. Each STC fragment, however trivial, is evidence that the search is worth continuing. And the evidence sustains the faith that the Mechanicus cannot afford to lose. The naming convention is significant. The vehicles are called the Land Raider and the Land Speeder not because they are designed for land operations, but because they are named after the Magos who discovered their templates. The convention reflects the Mechanicus's values. The discoverer of knowledge is honored above the knowledge itself, because the discovery is the sacred act that the Mechanicus's theology celebrates. The dangers of explorator missions are not limited to the hostile environments and the alien civilizations that the fleets encounter. The most dangerous threat that an explorator fleet faces is the technology it discovers. Pre-strife technology is not always benign. The Dark Age produced weapons that were designed to destroy civilizations, machines that were intended to operate autonomously, and artificial intelligences whose capabilities exceed what the current Mechanicus can safely control. An explorator fleet that discovers a Dark Age weapon system may find itself confronting technology that is actively hostile. Machines whose dormant systems reactivate in response to the fleet's presence, and whose capabilities exceed what the fleet's armaments can counter. The casualties that explorator fleets suffer in encounters with active pre-strife technology are among the highest in the Mechanicus's operations, and the losses are accepted because the potential reward, the recovery of the technology for study and replication, justifies the risk. The discoveries, when they come, are celebrated across the Mechanicus's network with a fervor that reflects the religious significance that the organization attaches to the recovery of lost knowledge. A new STC fragment, however minor, is cause for festivities that can last for days. The tech priests of the discovering fleet, honored with the kind of recognition that military organizations reserve for their most decorated heroes. The Knight households deserve discussion, because the Questa Mechanicus, the Knight houses that are sworn to the Mechanic, represent one of the organization's most potent military alliances. The Questa Mechanicus represents a feudal alliance that stretches back to the Dark Age of technology, a bond between the Mechanicus and the Knight worlds that has endured across millennia of political change, and that provides the Mechanicus with a military capability that complements its Skitarii legions and its Titan forces. The Knight worlds were originally colony worlds, planets that were settled during humanity's expansion across the galaxy, and that maintained their technological capability through the Age of Strife, by developing feudal societies organized around the maintenance and operation of the Knight suits. The Knights were the colony's protectors, the war machines that defended the human population against the alien predators and the environmental hazards that the colony worlds produced. The feudal structure that developed around the Knights was a natural response to the concentration of power that the war machines represented. The families that possessed Knights, the nobles who piloted them, became the ruling class of their worlds. Their authority derived from the military power that the Knights provided and maintained through the hereditary traditions that the Knight worlds developed. When the Mechanicus encountered the Knight worlds during the Great Expansion, the tech priests recognized the Knights as relics of the Dark Age, war machines whose technology predated the Mechanicus's own understanding, and whose capabilities exceeded what the Mechanicus could replicate from scratch. The Mechanicus offered the Knight worlds a deal: technological support for the maintenance of the Knights, in exchange for the Knight household's military service. An Imperial Knight is a war machine, smaller than a Titan but vastly larger than a conventional armored vehicle. A one-pilot walker that is crewed by a single noble who interfaces with the Knight's machine spirit through a neural link called the Throne Mechanicum. The throne is a device of extraordinary antiquity and complexity, a relic of the Dark Age that allows the pilot to merge their consciousness with the Knight's systems, controlling the war machine's movements and weapons with a fluency that conventional controls cannot provide. The Knight houses that are sworn to the Mechanicus, the Quaestor Mechanicus, provide their military services to the Forge Worlds in exchange for the technological support that the Mechanicus provides to maintain the Knight's ancient systems. The relationship is feudal, a bond of mutual obligation that mirrors the feudal arrangements that characterize the Knight Worlds' original social structures, and that has been maintained, with variations since the Mechanicus first encountered the Knight Worlds during the Great Expansion. Belisarius Call, the Archmagos Dominus, the most controversial, the most innovative, and arguably the most important tech priest in 10,000 years of Mechanicus history. Call is ancient, 10,000 years old, or close to it, a tech priest whose existence stretches back to the Horus heresy itself, and whose extraordinary survival across more than 10 millennia has been sustained by the augmentations that the Mechanicus' most advanced technologies can provide. Call's body is a mobile laboratory, a collection of mechanical systems and biological remnants that moves through the galaxy pursuing research projects that the Mechanicus' orthodoxy considers borderline heretical, and that the Imperium considers essential. Call's history during the 10,000 years between the heresy and the era Indomitus is one of the lore's most fascinating untold stories.
The Archmagos traveled the galaxy, pursuing research projects that the Mechanicus' orthodoxy would have condemned if the orthodoxy had known about them, developing technologies that pushed the boundaries of what the Mechanicus considered permissible, and accumulating knowledge that exceeded what any other living tech priest possessed. Call's personality is distinctive among the Mechanicus' hierarchy, where most senior tech priests have dampened their emotional responses through augmentation. Call retains a personality that is recognizably human, ambitious, impatient, arrogant, brilliant, and possessed of a sense of humor that his more orthodox colleagues find bewildering. Call argues, Call debates, Call pushes back against the institutional constraints that other tech priests accept without question, and the pushing produces innovations that the Mechanicus needs, but that the Mechanicus is constitutionally incapable of admitting it needs. Call's relationship with Guilliman is the political alliance that makes the Archmagos' continued operation possible. The returned Primarch needs Call's innovations. The Mechanicus' orthodoxy cannot provide the technological advancement that the Imperium's current crises demand, and Call's willingness to develop new technologies, to improve upon existing ones, to push the boundaries that the cult Mechanicus considers sacred, is the quality that makes the Archmagos indispensable to the Imperium's survival. Call created the Primaris Space Marines, the Archmagos working on a commission from Robut Guilliman that was issued before the Primarch's internment in stasis following the heresy. Spent 10,000 years developing an improved variant of the Space Marine gene seed that produces warriors who are stronger, faster, and more resilient than the standard Astartes. The Primaris Marines were unveiled during the era Indomitus, when Guilliman returned from stasis and launched the Indomitus Crusade, and the new warriors were deployed across the Imperium to reinforce the chapters that were struggling to contain the threats that the Great Rift had unleashed. Call's innovation is controversial within the Mechanicus. The Archmagos' willingness to modify the Emperor's original gene seed to improve upon a technology that the Mechanicus' orthodoxy considers perfect and sacred represents a philosophical challenge to the cult Mechanicus' foundational belief that the technologies inherited from the past should be preserved rather than modified, maintained rather than improved.
replicated rather than reinvented. The tension between preservation and innovation is the central conflict within the Mechanicus' ideology, the philosophical fault line that divides the organization's tech priests into factions whose disagreements occasionally erupt into the kind of internal conflicts that the broader Imperium finds alarming. The Orthodox faction, which represents the Mechanicus' mainstream, believes that the technologies of the past are sacred, that the knowledge that the Dark Age of technology produced represents the pinnacle of human achievement, and that the Mechanicus' mission is to preserve, recover, and replicate this knowledge rather than to develop new technologies that might improve upon it. The position is not unreasonable. The Dark Age of technology produced machines that the current Mechanicus cannot replicate. Technologies whose principles the current tech priests do not understand. Devices whose capabilities exceed anything that the Mechanicus' own research has produced. The Dark Age's technology was, by any measure, superior to what the Mechanicus can currently achieve, and the reverence that the Mechanicus shows toward the past is the reverence of a civilization that knows it has declined and that hopes, through faithful preservation, to eventually recover what it has lost. The position is also self-defeating. A civilization that refuses to innovate is a civilization that stagnates, and stagnation, in a galaxy that produces new threats with relentless regularity, is a form of slow-motion extinction. The Imperium's enemies evolve. The Tyranids adapt. The Necrons awaken with technologies that exceed anything the Mechanicus possesses. The forces of chaos develop new weapons and new tactics that the Mechanicus' static technological base cannot counter. The refusal to innovate, whatever its theological justification, leaves the Mechanicus and the Imperium increasingly vulnerable to threats that the past's technology was not designed to address. Call represents the opposing faction. The tech priests who believe that the Mechanicus' mission should include innovation alongside preservation, that the machine god intended humanity to develop new technologies as well as to preserve old ones, and that the refusal to innovate is not fidelity to the machine god's will, but a betrayal of it. The internal politics of the Mechanicus are as complex and as ruthless as the politics of any imperial institution. The tech priests pursuing their agendas with the calculated precision that their augmented minds and their centuries of institutional experience produce. The factions within the Mechanicus do not align neatly along a single axis. The conservative progressive spectrum, represented by the tension between the orthodox preservers and Call's innovators, is only one of the fault lines that divide the organization. Other divisions reflect the competing interests of different forge worlds, the rivalries between different orders of the tech priesthood, the theological debates about the nature of the machine god, and the proper interpretation of the cult Mechanicus' scripture. The Xenorites of Styges 8, who advocate for the study of alien technology, are opposed by the Puritans, who argue that the machine god's knowledge is exclusively human, and that the study of Xenos technology is a form of heresy. The technotheologians, who pursue the merger of flesh and machine as a spiritual practice, are opposed by the Cognitae, who argue that the cognitive functions of the tech priest should be enhanced through the improvement of the biological brain rather than through its replacement. The Logis, who favor the mathematical analysis of data as the Mechanicus' primary methodology, are opposed by the artisans, who argue that the creation of beautiful machines is as important as the creation of functional ones. These divisions produce a political landscape within the Mechanicus that is as fractious and as competitive as the Imperium's own political environment. And the competition between factions produces outcomes that range from the productive to the catastrophic. The faction is powerful but minority. Call's allies within the Mechanicus are fewer than his enemies, and the Archmagos's continued operation depends more on the political protection that Guilliman provides than on the support of the Mechanicus's own hierarchy. Without Guilliman's patronage, Call would likely have been declared a heretic, a tech heretic whose innovations violated the cult Mechanicus's doctrines, and whose research should be suppressed. The tension will not be resolved. The Mechanicus will not abandon its orthodoxy, because the orthodoxy is the foundation of the organization's identity. The Mechanicus will not embrace Call's philosophy, because embracing innovation would require the organization to admit that its current approach is insufficient, and the admission would undermine the faith that holds the Mechanicus together. The tension persists. The tension is, in a sense, the most human thing about the Mechanicus. The conflict between tradition and progress, between the reverence for what was and the need for what might be, playing out within an organization that has replaced most of its humanity with machinery, but that cannot replace the fundamental human disagreement about whether the future should look like the past. The Night Worlds and the Questa Mechanicus add a feudal dimension to the Mechanicus's military capabilities. The night houses that serve the Mechanicus fight alongside the Skitari and the Titan legions, their war machines providing the mid-range combat capability that fills the gap between the individual soldier and the god machine. The knights are powerful, each one capable of engaging enemy armor and fortifications with weapons that can level buildings. And the Knight household's feudal loyalty to the Mechanicus ensures that the tech priests can deploy these assets with the confidence that the pilot's obedience will match the machine's capability. The machine spirits that inhabit the Mechanicus's equipment range from the rudimentary to the complex, and the Mechanicus's relationship with these spirits is one of the organization's defining cultural characteristics. A simple machine spirit, the kind that inhabits a lasgun or a voxcaster, is barely more than a metaphor, a theological label applied to the device's operational parameters. The tech priest who performs the rituals of activation on a simple weapon is, in practical terms, performing the maintenance steps that keep the weapon functional. And the theological language that the tech priest uses to describe these steps is a cultural overlay rather than a functional necessity. A complex machine spirit, the kind that inhabits a titan or a warship or an ancient piece of Dark Age technology, is something more. The complex spirits display behaviors that are difficult to explain without invoking the concept of consciousness, preferences, moods, responses to their operators that seem to reflect an awareness of the relationship between the machine and the person who commands it. A warship's machine spirit may respond differently to different captains, performing better for officers whose commands align with the ship's own operational history, and performing worse for officers whose commands conflict with the patterns that the spirit has developed over centuries of operation. The Necron technology presents a particular theological challenge for the Mechanicus. The Necrons possess a technological mastery that exceeds the Mechanicus's capabilities by orders of magnitude, and the Necron artifacts that the Mechanicus has encountered demonstrate principles of engineering that the Mechanicus's accumulated knowledge cannot explain. The Necron Gauss weapons disassemble matter at the molecular level, The Necron resurrection protocols reconstruct destroyed warriors from their constituent particles. The Necron ships navigate the galaxy through methods that do not rely on the warp, and that therefore bypass the dangers that warp travel imposes on the Imperium's fleet operations. Each of these technologies represents a capability that the Mechanicus cannot replicate, and that the Mechanicus's theology struggles to accommodate. The struggle is theological as well as practical. If the machine god is the source of all technology, then the Necron technology is also the machine god's creation. But the Necrons are aliens, Xenos, creatures whose civilization predates humanity by millions of years, and whose technology was developed without reference to the machine god's teachings. The Mechanicus must either acknowledge that the machine god's domain extends beyond humanity, a concession that the organization's human-centric theology resists, or declare that the Necron technology is not true technology, a position that the technology's manifest superiority makes difficult to sustain. The Aldari present a different challenge. The Aldari's technology is organic, or semi-organic, produced through processes that combine psychic manipulation with biological engineering. The Aldari's wraithbone, the psychically responsive material from which the Aldari construct their buildings, their vehicles, and their weapons, is a technology that the Mechanicus cannot categorize within its existing theological categories, because the material is simultaneously alive and artificial, organic and engineered, natural and manufactured. The Mechanicus's response to alien technology is typically one of three reactions: study destruction or denial. The Xenorites study. The Puritans destroy. The Orthodoxy denies, asserting that alien technology is inherently inferior to human technology, and that the apparent superiority of certain alien systems is an illusion produced by the observer's failure to appreciate the subtleties of the machine god's human-directed gifts. The Mechanicus insists that these behaviors are not consciousness. The Mechanicus insists that machine spirits are fundamentally different from the artificial intelligences that the Emperor prohibited. The insistence is maintained with a ferocity that suggests that the Mechanicus is not entirely confident in the distinction, and that the tech priests who study machine spirits most closely are the tech priests who are most aware that the line between a complex machine spirit and a simple artificial intelligence is a line that may not exist. The Imperium allows the fiction to stand, because the alternative, investigating whether the Mechanicus's machine spirits violate the prohibition on artificial intelligence, would produce a theological crisis that neither the Imperium nor the Mechanicus could survive. The Mechanicus maintains an organization called the Legio Cybernetica, a division that controls the battle automata, the robotic soldiers that the Mechanicus deploys alongside its Skitari legions. The battle automata are robots, machines that fight without human operators, controlled by artificial intelligences that are, despite the Mechanicus's insistence otherwise, exactly the kind of machine consciousness that the Emperor prohibited. The Mechanicus manages the contradiction through theology. The battle automata are not artificial intelligences, the Mechanicus argues. They are servitor brains, biological neural tissue that has been integrated into a mechanical body, producing a controller that is technically organic rather than synthetic. The argument is tenuous. The battle automata's behaviors exceed what biological neural tissue, even modified biological neural tissue, should be able to produce. And the suspicion that the Legios Cyberneticas machines contain genuine artificial intelligence is a suspicion that the Inquisition periodically investigates, and that the Mechanicus periodically deflects. The relationship between the Mechanicus and the concept of innovation deserves final examination, because the relationship reveals the fundamental paradox at the heart of the machine cult. The Mechanicus worships knowledge. The Mechanicus declares that knowledge is the truest form of divinity. The Mechanicus sends its explorator fleets across the galaxy in search of lost technologies, investing enormous resources in the recovery of knowledge that has been lost. The Mechanicus does not create knowledge. The Mechanicus recovers knowledge. The distinction is central to the organization's theology and is central to the organization's dysfunction. The Mechanicus will travel across the galaxy to find an STC fragment that contains the blueprint for a slightly improved version of an existing weapon. The Mechanicus will not invest the same resources in developing the improvement itself, because the development of new technology is not recovery but creation, and creation is the machine god's prerogative rather than the tech priest's. The result is a civilization that is simultaneously the galaxy's most technologically advanced and the galaxy's most technologically conservative. An organization that possesses knowledge that exceeds what any other human institution can match, and that is constitutionally incapable of adding to that knowledge through the process that every other civilization uses: experimentation, innovation, and the willingness to develop solutions to problems that the past did not anticipate. The paradox is the Mechanicus's tragedy. The organization that worships knowledge has made a religion of not creating it, and the religion has produced a civilization that is dependent on the past for its future, a civilization that can only advance by looking backward. A civilization whose greatest fear is not that its technology will become obsolete, but that its faith will prove insufficient to prevent the obsolescence. The Mechanicus is, in many ways, the most frightening institution in the Imperium. Not because of its military power, which is considerable but not unique. Not because of its political influence, which is immense but not unprecedented. The Mechanicus is frightening because the organization demonstrates with terrifying clarity what happens to a civilization that loses the ability to understand its own technology. The Imperium depends on machines that nobody understands: the Golden Throne, the warp drives, the power generators, the atmospheric processors, the life support systems, the weapons, the ships, the millions of machines that keep 1 trillion humans alive across 1 million worlds. Nobody understands them. The tech priests maintain them through rituals that encode knowledge they cannot explain. And the rituals work. For now, but the rituals are degrading. And when the rituals stop working, the machines will stop working. And when the machines stop working, the civilization they support will stop working. The Mechanicus knows this. The most self-aware tech priests understand that they are custodians of a heritage that is slowly crumbling, that the knowledge they guard is eroding faster than they can repair it, and that the eventual result, unless the trajectory is reversed, is a civilization that cannot maintain the machines that keep it alive. The Mechanicus cannot reverse the trajectory. The Mechanicus's theology, the very faith that holds the organization together, prevents the innovation that would be necessary to develop the understanding that the Mechanicus has lost. The faith that sustains the organization is the faith that ensures its eventual failure. This is the machine cult's paradox. The faith preserves, the faith constrains, The faith sustains the organization that is slowly dying because the faith prevents the cure. The Mechanicus is the Imperium's most important institution and the Imperium's most fragile. The importance comes from the technology. The fragility comes from the theology. The technology sustains the Imperium. The theology constrains the technology. And the constraint, enforced by a faith that is as rigid as the machines it worships, ensures that the Imperium's technological capabilities will continue to decline, slowly, inexorably, as the knowledge that the Mechanicus preserves degrades faster than the Mechanicus can recover it. This is the Mechanicus's secret, not the Dragon of Mars, not the machine spirits, not the forbidden technologies that the Dark Mechanicum pursues. The secret is that the Mechanicus is losing. The organization that is responsible for the Imperium's technology is losing the war against entropy, the slow, grinding, inevitable degradation of knowledge that occurs when a civilization stops creating and starts only preserving. The process of knowledge degradation is mechanical, inevitable, and heartbreaking for the tech priests who are aware enough to recognize it. Consider a simple example. A forge world possesses a template for a power cell, a component that is used in thousands of different machines. The template is an STC fragment recovered centuries ago that contains the instructions for the cell's manufacture. The instructions are followed precisely. The cells are produced. The cells work. A century passes. The forge world's environment changes. A minor shift in the mineral composition of the raw materials that the manufactorum uses. The cells still work, but their performance has degraded slightly. Because the instructions were calibrated for the original mineral composition, and the adjustment that the original engineers would have made to account for the change is an adjustment that the current tech priests do not know how to make. Because the adjustment requires understanding the principles of electrochemistry that the STC fragment does not contain. Another century passes. The manufactorum's equipment degrades, the machines that produce the cells developing wear that affects their precision. The cells still work, but their performance has degraded further. The tech priests maintain the machines using the rituals they have inherited, but the rituals do not include the calibration steps that the original engineers would have performed to compensate for the equipment's wear. Because the calibration requires understanding the manufacturing process at a level that the rituals do not encode. The cycle continues. Each generation of tech priests produces cells that are slightly less effective than the previous generations, and each generation lacks the understanding to diagnose the degradation, to identify its causes, and to develop the solutions that would arrest or reverse it. The degradation is invisible to the individual tech priest, because the tech priest has never seen a cell that performs at the original standard and therefore has no baseline against which to measure the current performance. This process, multiplied across every technology that the Mechanicus produces, across every forge world in the galaxy, across 10,000 years of accumulated degradation, is the Mechanicus's existential crisis. The organization is losing its inheritance, one imperceptible step at a time. And the loss is driven by the same theology that the organization clings to as its salvation. Each generation of tech priests understands a little less than the generation before. Each copy of an STC fragment introduces errors that the next copy compounds. Each machine that is built according to rituals that the builder does not fully understand is a machine that is slightly less reliable, slightly less capable, slightly less effective than the machine that preceded it. The decline is imperceptible on a human timescale. On the timescale of the Imperium, across 10,000 years of accumulated degradation, the decline is catastrophic. The Imperium's technology is not what it was. The weapons are not as powerful. The ships are not as fast. The machines are not as reliable. The gap between what the Mechanicus can produce and what the Dark Age of technology produced is growing, and the Mechanicus cannot close the gap, because the Mechanicus's theology prevents the only activity that could close it, the creation of new knowledge. Call is the exception. Call innovates. Call creates. Call develops new technologies with the enthusiasm of a tech priest who has rejected the orthodoxy that constrains his colleagues and who pursues the advancement of human capability with a fervor that the Mechanicus's conservatives find terrifying. The era Indomitus has produced new challenges for the Mechanicus that the organization's theology was not designed to address. The Great Rift, the vast warp storm that bisects the galaxy, has disrupted the supply lines that connect the Mechanicus's forge worlds, severing the communications and the trade routes that the organization depends on. The forge worlds on the far side of the rift, in the region that the Imperium calls the Imperium Nihilus, are isolated, cut off from the Mechanicus's hierarchy, operating independently in a way that the Mechanicus's centralized structure was not designed to accommodate. The isolated forge worlds are adapting, developing independent capabilities and making independent decisions that the Fabricator General of Mars has no ability to oversee or approve. The isolation is producing innovation. The forge worlds that are cut off from Mars's orthodoxy are experimenting, developing new technologies and new approaches that the Martian hierarchy would never have sanctioned, because the isolation has removed the institutional pressure that the hierarchy exerts, and because the threats that the isolated forge worlds face require solutions that the Mechanicus's existing technology cannot provide. The innovation is accelerating the theological crisis that the Mechanicus has been struggling with since the heresy's aftermath. The orthodox position that the Mechanicus's mission is preservation rather than creation is becoming increasingly untenable in a galaxy where the threats are evolving faster than the Mechanicus's preserved technologies can counter. Call may be the Mechanicus's salvation. Call may be the Mechanicus's greatest heretic. The determination depends on whether the Mechanicus's future belongs to the preservers or the innovators, and the determination has not been made, and the determination may never be made. Because the Mechanicus's institutional inertia is a force that exceeds even Call's extraordinary capabilities. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the machine cult, the priesthood of Mars, the organization that worships knowledge and fears learning, that builds the machines that sustain civilization and that cannot explain how the machines work, that controls the technology that keeps the Emperor alive and that is slowly, inevitably, inexorably losing the ability to do so. The tech priests continue to pray in their cathedrals of steel and stone, in the manufactorums that produce the machinery of war, in the laboratories where the fragments of the past are studied with the reverence of monks examining holy texts. The tech priests pray to the machine god, asking for guidance, for knowledge, for the revelation that will restore the technologies that time has consumed. The machine god does not answer. The machine god has never answered, not in 10,000 years of prayer, not in the millennia of devotion that the Mechanicus has offered, not once, not ever. The tech priests pray anyway, because the faith is all they have. Because the alternative, admitting that the machine god is silent and that the silence may be permanent, would destroy the organization that the faith sustains. The inner life of a tech priest is one of the law's most intriguing mysteries. The augmentations that the tech priests undergo modify not merely their bodies, but their cognition. The cogitator implants processing information in ways that supplement and partially replace the biological brain's native capabilities. A tech priest's thoughts are not purely organic. They are hybrid, a mixture of biological neural activity and synthetic data processing that produces a consciousness whose nature is unlike anything that either biological or synthetic systems produce in isolation. The hybrid consciousness experiences the world differently from a purely biological mind. The tech priest perceives electromagnetic radiation across frequencies that biological eyes cannot detect. The tech priest processes mathematical calculations with a speed and a precision that biological neural tissue cannot match. The tech priest stores memories with a fidelity that biological memory cannot achieve. The augmented memory banks recording every sensory input with a completeness that allows the tech priest to recall events from decades ago with the clarity of direct experience. But the hybrid consciousness also loses things. The emotional warmth that biological minds produce through the interaction of neurotransmitters and hormonal systems is diminished by the augmentations, the synthetic components processing emotional data as information rather than experiencing it as feeling. A tech priest who has been augmented extensively may understand sadness without feeling it, may recognize beauty without being moved by it, may comprehend love without experiencing it. The loss is gradual, progressive, and usually unnoticed by the tech priest undergoing it. The tech priest does not feel the warmth leaving because the warmth's departure is too slow to detect. A temperature change of a fraction of a degree per decade that the tech priest's consciousness processes as normalcy rather than as loss. The tech priests, who retain enough emotional capacity to recognize what they are losing, are the saddest figures in the Mechanicus's hierarchy. Beings who understand that the augmentations they are receiving are destroying the very consciousness that the augmentations are supposed to serve, and who continue receiving the augmentations anyway, because the faith demands it, because the machine god requires it, because the alternative is to stop the pilgrimage toward perfection, and to admit that the destination is a place where the pilgrim ceases to exist, because the faith is all they have, because the alternative, admitting that the machine god is silent and that the silence may be permanent, would destroy the organization that the faith sustains. Because the machines must be maintained, and the knowledge must be preserved, and the Imperium must be supplied with the technology that keeps it alive. And someone has to do the work, and the work is holy, and the holiness is the thing that makes the work bearable. The Adeptus Mechanicus represents the Warhammer 40,000 setting's most profound statement about the relationship between knowledge and understanding, between capability and comprehension, between the ability to use something and the ability to understand why it works. The Mechanicus can build a plasma reactor. The Mechanicus cannot explain why the reactor works. The Mechanicus can produce a Titan. The Mechanicus cannot describe the principles that allow the Titan to function. The Mechanicus can maintain the Golden Throne. The Mechanicus cannot explain the technology that the throne embodies. This gap between capability and comprehension is the setting's most terrifying concept, more frightening than the daemons, more disturbing than the Tyranids, more threatening than the Necrons. Because the gap means that the Imperium's survival depends on knowledge that nobody understands. That the machines that keep 1 trillion humans alive are maintained through rituals whose principles have been lost. And that the civilization that stretches across 1 million worlds could collapse if the rituals are disrupted. If the procedures are corrupted, if the knowledge that the rituals encode degrades beyond the point of functionality. The Mechanicus is the priesthood of a dying technology. The tech priests tend the machines the way that a devout congregation tends a church, with reverence, with devotion, with the absolute conviction that the sacred object must be preserved. But the tech priests do not understand the machines the way that the builders understood them. And the understanding is the thing that would allow the machines to be repaired, improved, adapted to the changing conditions that the galaxy produces. Without understanding, there is only ritual. And ritual, however faithfully performed, cannot adapt. Ritual can only repeat. And repetition, in a universe that changes constantly, is a strategy for slow extinction.
The Adeptus Mechanicus is the institution that makes the Warhammer 40,000 setting's grimdark philosophy concrete. The setting's central theme, that the future is not progress but decline, that humanity's golden age is behind it, and that the current civilization is a shadow of what came before, is embodied in the Mechanicus more completely than in any other faction.
The Space Marines are warriors who fight bravely against impossible odds. The Astra Militarum is an army that sacrifices millions to hold the line. The Inquisition is a police force that maintains order through ruthless efficiency. These are all expressions of the setting's darkness, but they are expressions of darkness in action, of active responses to the galaxy's threats. The Mechanicus is darkness in stasis. The Mechanicus is an organization that is standing still while the galaxy moves around it. An institution that has chosen preservation over adaptation, and that is, through the choice, ensuring its own slow obsolescence. The Mechanicus is the institution that makes the Imperium's decline inevitable, because the Mechanicus controls the technology that the Imperium depends on, and the Mechanicus's theology prevents the technology from advancing. The tragedy is that the Mechanicus's choice is understandable. The Dark Ages technology was superior to anything the current Mechanicus can produce. The reverence for the past is not misplaced. The faith that drives the preservation is not irrational. The tech priests are right to believe that the past was greater than the present. They are wrong to conclude that the appropriate response to the past's greatness is to refuse to create a future that might be different.
The Mechanicus stands at the intersection of humanity's past and humanity's future, an institution that preserves the echoes of a civilization that was greater than the current one, and that guards the dwindling knowledge that the current civilization depends on for survival. The tech priests know this. The most self-aware among them understand that their organization is a custodian of a legacy that is slowly eroding, that the rituals they perform are growing less effective as the knowledge they encode degrades, and that the faith they profess is a bulwark against a despair that would consume the organization if the faith were ever questioned. The cog turns. The incense rises.
The binary cant, the digital liturgy that the tech priests recite in the machine language that their augmented vocal cords produce, echoes through the cathedrals of Mars, a prayer to a god whose existence is uncertain and whose silence is absolute. The daily life of a tech priest is governed by the liturgical calendar that the cult Mechanicus maintains, a schedule of prayers, rituals, and maintenance cycles that structures every hour of every day across the Mechanicus's galaxy-spanning organization. The day begins with the rite of activation, the prayer that the tech priest recites as their augmentations power up from the reduced power state that serves as the Mechanicus's equivalent of sleep. The prayer is functional as well as devotional. The rite includes the system checks that verify the tech priest's augmentations are operating correctly, the diagnostic routines encoded in the prayer's binary phrases, producing a comprehensive assessment of the tech priest's mechanical components before the day's work begins. The work itself is prayer. The distinction between labor and worship does not exist within the Mechanicus's culture, because the theology that governs the organization declares that the two are identical. The maintenance of a machine is an act of worship. The repair of a damaged system is an offering to the machine god. The construction of a new component is a hymn made physical. The consequence of this theology is a workforce that does not experience the separation between work and spiritual life that other cultures maintain. A tech priest does not work during the week and worship on a holy day. Every day is a holy day. Every task is a sacred act. Every moment of the tech priest's existence is a moment of service to the machine god, and the seamlessness of the service produces a devotion that is more comprehensive and more all-consuming than anything that religions with designated worship periods can achieve. The festivals of the cult Mechanicus are tied to the technological calendar rather than to the astronomical calendar that other imperial institutions follow. The Feast of the Blessed Integration celebrates the anniversary of a Forge World's most significant technological acquisition. The Day of the Cog commemorates the founding of the cult Mechanicus on Mars. The Festival of the Omnissiah celebrates the Emperor's recognition as the machine god's avatar, and the celebration produces the Mechanicus's most elaborate rituals, the binary hymns and the mechanical processions and the anointing of the Forge World's most sacred machines with the oils that the tech priests have consecrated through centuries of use. The work itself is prayer. Every task that the tech priest performs is accompanied by the appropriate liturgy, the binary cant that the priest recites while working, serving both as a devotional act and as a verbal record of the procedures being performed. The cant is recorded by the tech priest's augmentations, producing a log of every action that the priest has taken, every procedure that the priest has followed, every deviation from the prescribed sequence that the work has required. The deviations are rare and dangerous. A tech priest who deviates from the prescribed sequence is a tech priest who is either innovating or failing, and the Mechanicus's culture does not distinguish between the two with any enthusiasm. A deviation that produces a positive result is an anomaly that must be investigated. A deviation that produces a negative result is a heresy that must be punished. The maintenance schedules that the tech priests follow are among the most detailed documents that the Mechanicus produces. Multi-volume records that specify every step of every procedure that the tech priest must perform to keep a particular machine operational. The schedules are sacred texts treated with the same reverence that the broader Imperium's clergy shows toward their scriptures, and the tech priest who deviates from a maintenance schedule is treated with the same severity that the ecclesiarchy shows toward a priest who deviates from canonical doctrine. The result is a culture of rigid conformity that rewards consistency, and that views creativity with the suspicion that a theologian views heterodoxy. The prayer continues. The prayer will always and forever continue. Because the machines need the priests, and the priests need the faith, and the faith needs the prayer, and the prayer needs the silence. Because a God who answers is a God who can be understood, and a God who can be understood is a God who can be replaced, and the Mechanicus cannot afford to replace the machine God, because the machine God is the foundation on which everything is built. The cog turns. The machine endures. The prayer rises from 1 billion augmented throats across 1,000 forged worlds. The binary cant, carrying the devotion of an organization that has served the machine god for longer than most civilizations have existed. The Mechanicus will continue. The organization will persist, will maintain the machines, will preserve the knowledge, will supply the technology that the Imperium requires, because the alternative is the collapse of the civilization that the Mechanicus sustains, and that sustains the Mechanicus in return. The faith will continue. The tech priests will continue to believe, to worship, to sacrifice their flesh in the service of a God whose nature they may never understand, and whose existence they may never confirm. The faith is necessary. The faith is essential. The faith is the thing that holds the organization together when the politics and the economics and the military pressures would otherwise tear it apart. The knowledge will continue to degrade. This is the tragedy that the faith cannot address. The slow, grinding, imperceptible erosion of the heritage that the Mechanicus guards. Each century a little more is lost. Each century the rituals become a little less effective. Each century the machines become a little less reliable, the weapons a little less powerful, the ships a little less fast. The degradation is the tide. The Mechanicus is the seawall. The seawall holds, for now, but the tide does not stop, and the seawall was built by hands that understood the engineering better than the hands that maintain it, and the maintenance is growing more difficult with each passing year. The cog turns, the machine endures, the knowledge fades, the faith remains. And somewhere beneath the surface of Mars, in a vault that predates human civilization, something sleeps, something dreams, something whose dreams shaped the faith that sustains the Mechanicus, and whose awakening would transform the galaxy in ways that the tech priests cannot predict, and that the Emperor ensured they would not investigate. The Mechanicus's future depends on a question that the organization cannot ask, and that the galaxy's circumstances are forcing it to confront. Can a civilization that worships its past build a future? The question is existential. The Mechanicus's entire identity is built on the reverence for inherited knowledge, on the belief that the past was greater than the present, and that the present's mission is to preserve the past's legacy rather than to create a new one. The identity has sustained the organization for 10 millennia. The identity is also the constraint that prevents the organization from responding to the galaxy's evolving threats with the adaptability that survival requires. Call represents one possible answer: innovation alongside preservation, creation alongside recovery, a Mechanicus that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. The answer is attractive, but dangerous,
because the innovation that call advocates would require the Mechanicus to abandon the theological certainties that hold the organization together, and the abandonment might produce a crisis of faith that the organization cannot survive. The orthodoxy represents the other possible answer: continued preservation, continued ritual, continued faith in the machine god's providence and in the eventual recovery of the Dark Age's lost knowledge. The answer is comfortable but unsustainable, because the degradation that the preservation approach produces is accelerating, and because the threats that the galaxy produces are not waiting for the Mechanicus to find the STC fragments that would allow the organization to counter them.
The Mechanicus will probably continue as it has, neither fully innovating nor fully preserving, the tension between the two approaches producing a slow, grinding, unresolved debate that the organization's institutional inertia prevents from being settled. The debate will continue until the debate becomes moot, until the Golden Throne fails, until the machines stop working, until the knowledge degrades beyond the point of recovery, until the civilization that the Mechanicus sustains can no longer be sustained. The dragon sleeps. The cog turns. The machine endures. Good night.